Hello guys and welcome to the Holy Paladin PvE guide for Wrath of the Lich King expansion based on the latest OG patch 3.3.5. This guide was made in collaboration with Teamy in order to provide you with the most comprehensive and in-depth guide that is mainly focused on endgame content only, meaning I'm not going to do a full breakdown of all tiers when it comes to gearing, but everything else in the guide will also apply to what you'd experience from tier 7 to tier 10. That being said, I will cover everything you see in the table of contents, as well as go into some of the theorycrafting math. In summary, this will be a full breakdown of Holy Paladin's stats, spells, talents, professions, gear, and all mechanics in general. So without further ado, let's get started. Holy Paladin is the strongest single target healer in the game and is essential to any raid success as he is primarily a tank healer. It will be almost impossible to find a raid roster without a Holy Paladin in a 25-man raid. Even having two is not uncommon, especially while progressing through content. The Paladin's biggest strength, other than his single target healing capability, is his mana efficiency and the wide range of cooldowns that can come in handy if things do not go according to plan, or can be used preemptively to make a difficult part of an encounter considerably easier. Like every class, Holy Paladins also have their weaknesses, and the major ones are related to the relatively low amount of AoE healing, which is limited to the use of Glyph of Holy Light, as well as almost non-existent capability to heal while moving. Holy Paladin gains a lot of power and utility from talents, but in return, the spec becomes a lot more inflexible as Divine Guardian requires a deep protection subspec and no additional benefits that Retribution Tree offers really compares to the power of this raid-wide cooldown that provides 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. Here you can see the standard talent build that you'll generally run for all PvE content as a Holy Paladin. I will not go into full details of what each talent does, because I will cover the most important parts in more depth later in this video, and you will have a better understanding on how the talents interact with Holy Paladin's abilities and mechanics. However, I will mention a few of them as well as very minor modifications that this talent build is predisposed to. Holy Paladin offers the best supporting talents as well as major and minor raid and self utilities and cooldowns through Aura Mastery, Divine Sacrifice, Divine Guardian, Improved Lay on Hands, Improved Devotion Aura, Divine Illumination, Divine Favor, and Beacon of Light. Improved Devotion Aura increases the healing received by 6% for any raid member affected by some of the auras, and increasing the armor the Devotion Aura provides by 50% with 3 points. The healing effect of the talent does not stack with Tree of Life aura of Resto Druid, so as long as you have a Resto Druid in the raid or a second Paladin spec into Improved Devotion Aura, you have the option to move 2 points into Improved Blessing of Wisdom that will increase the MP5 gain from the Blessing of Wisdom by additional 18 and 1 point into Blessed Hands, but more on that later. In case you have a second Holy Paladin running Improved Blessing of Wisdom talent in the raid, you can move these 2 points into Benediction, which will reduce the mana cost of your instant spells by 4%, such as Beacon of Light, Sacred Shield, and Holy Shock. Why 3 points in Improved Righteous Fury talent? You need to spend an additional 4 points in 3rd tier of Protection Tree talents in order to reach the next tier. Toughness talent, that might be seen as the easiest option here to spend all points on, increases your armor additionally, which comes in handy against physical mechanics such as Bone Storm of Lord Marrowgar or Deathbringer Saurfang encounter. But Improved Righteous Fury on the other side is the better and no-brainer option to spec into, as this talent reduces the damage taken off all sources by 6% as long as Righteous Fury is active on you. There are a lot of unavoidable raid AoE abilities that you are just getting 6% free DR for. Always take it, even if you are too afraid to use Righteous Fury sometimes. If you're worried that you might pull aggro during boss fight as a Holy Paladin, don't be, because this is almost impossible unless in some specific scenarios I'm going to explain later on. But first, let's take some time for clearing up of how threat for Holy Paladins does work. All threat auras stack in multiplicative fashion. Healing spells in Wrath of the Lich King generate 50% threat of the effective amount healed. Our heals do not generate any threat. Holy Paladins have an additional innate threat reduction of 50%, which will give them a total of 25% coefficient for threat generation. This basically means that each 4 points of healing done will generate 1 point of threat. When Righteous Fury is considered, the ability increases all threat generated from holy spells by additional 80%, but also the game considers that you are in tanking mode, which additionally increases the threat coefficient by 43% on all actions. In summary, healing spells for Holy Paladin have 0.25 and 0.6435 threat multipliers when Righteous Fury is off and on respectively. And while in the second case the threat multiplier of Holy Paladin is about 28% higher compared to the 0.5 multiplier the other healers normally have, it's still below of what damage dealers have as threat multipliers, even when we consider their talent threat reduction effects. Valithria Dreamwalker, however, is an encounter where pulling aggro from ads is almost guaranteed Righteous Fury is active on you because of how the fight works, especially when you're affected by nightmare stacks and healing cooldowns are being used. The amount of healing done you can throw on that fight is high enough to quickly see yourself on top of the threat meter, so just don't use Righteous Fury on that fight ever. I would also advise you to have the arrow off when a huge pack of trash is pulled by the tanks, or generally speaking for those moments during a boss fights when adds are periodically spawned, such as at Lady Deathwhisper and the Deathbringer Saurfang encounters. In any case, bear in mind to use Righteous Fury with caution and to be sure to monitor the raid threat using some threat meter, especially if you are in a pug raids where people are still on a learning curve and you might be way overgeared than them on top of that. Moving on to stats, here I'm going to explain what each stat does for Holy Paladin and how it is being calculated, as later in the video I'll take more time speaking about Holy Paladin stats priority. Starting with the primary stats, you have Intellect. 1 point of Intellect gives you 15 mana. 5 points in Divine Intellect Talent and Blessing of Kings increase it to 18.15 mana. Intellect also increases spell power by 20% of the total intellect pool with 5 points in Holy Guidance talent. This means that 1 intellect also provides you with 0.242 spell power. Intellect also gives a spell crit, as the amount needed to gain 1% is 166.67 intellect at level 80. The base mana pool of Paladin before intellect is 4394. Keep in mind the first 20 points of intellect that take a part of your natural amount of intellect before any gear is equipped provides you with 1 mana per point of intellect. The equation of how the total mana pool is being calculated you can see in the video. Spirit is a stat Holy Paladin has no real benefit from, as Restitute does for example, nor you want to gear for it unless in some cases when you are still in the process of gearing up, where an item with Spirit might be a good option if it's a huge upgrade to what you currently have, especially if that Spirit item contains Haste Rating. Spirit however still has a very minor contribution to longevity in some scenarios. To see why, I have to explain what the 5-second rule means. The 5-second rule is the mechanic that dictates no mana will be regenerated naturally, that is, via base regeneration plus spirit modifier for 5 seconds after a spell that costs mana is cast. While under the effect of the 5-second rule, you regenerate an amount of mana displayed by the in-game character panel as mana regenerated while casting, which is the sum of mana restored from MP5 items plus any passive mana regeneration granted from talents or abilities. This amount is always on and will regenerate its value regardless whether or not you're casting. Your full natural regeneration combined with mana regen while casting is referred to in-game character panel as mana regenerated while not casting. That being said, there are some boss mechanics that would potentially disable you for a long enough time, letting some ticks from the extra mana regen to kick on. Such ones are if you are marked with Frosttomb at Sindragosa encounter or you are getting grabbed by Valkyrie at Lich King fight. For secondary stats, first you have Spell Power. Spell Power is a stat that increases the raw amount of healing your spells do. The plus healing you get per point of spell power is different for each spell or ability and depends on the spell power coefficient, talent modifiers and multipliers, and additional buffs that directly increase a spell's healing output. The talent modifiers and additional healing increasing effects are applied and calculated after the spell power and the base healing of the spell. To calculate how much actual raw healing your spells do, you have to multiply the spell power coefficient of the spell by your total bonus healing and add the result into the average of spells base minimum and maximum. If you want to factor in crit, multiply this equation by 1 plus your total crit chance, multiplied by the crit's bonus value, which is an additional 150%. The math function of spell power is linear, which means that a point of spell power always adds the same amount of extra healing to a given spell. Haste Rating is an exceptionally good stat for Holy Paladin and will be the one sought after secondary stats that you want to have it on all possible items. At level 80, 1% spell haste equals 32.79 haste rating. 1% spell haste doesn't mean your cast time or global cooldown is reduced by 1%, but it means you will cast one additional spell in the time it would normally take you to cast 100. The game has a built-in 1 second global cooldown. That's the reason why you cannot use your instant cast spells as fast as you can spam them. All casters have a built-in base 1.5 second global cooldown, and in order to get it down to 1 second, a 50% total spell haste is required. I'd like to point out here that the global cooldown triggered by Judgment spell is not affected by haste, and it's always 1.5 seconds. For Holy Paladin, a 50% spell haste is achievable with 676 haste rating, considering you're affected by the following buffs. First is Rat Over Totem provided by Shaman, which gives 5% spell haste. Then you have Retribution Paladin or Boomkin that provides you with additional 3% spell and melee haste via improved Boomkin form, Swift Retribution, and finally your Judgments of the Pure Talent that at 5 points give you 15% spell and melee haste. The latter requires from you to do at least one successful judgment cast per minute in order to keep the buff on you up at all times. Melee haste is also important for Holy Paladin because it reduces your melee swing timer. Because of the Seal of Wisdom mechanic, which I'll speak more about later in the video, this will ensure that at higher levels of haste, you will always be able to get a melee swing in when you cast an instant cast spell, as these do not reset your melee swing timer where the normal casts do. This means that when you complete any cast time, you have to wait for a time that equals your current swing timer for the first auto hit to be applied. Frost or Blood Decays as well as Enhancement Shaman provide you with an additional 20% melee haste. 1% melee haste requires 25.21 haste rating at level 80. As spell soft cap is pretty easily achievable even at lower levels of gear, the main reason of stacking more haste rating is to reduce the cast time of Holy Light as your main source of healing and the one you're going to use in the majority of the time. Haste rating adds up flexibility as well as more consistent and frequent healing for the raid. That being said, at BS gear, the cast time of Holy Light will round at about 1.2ish seconds considering all haste buffs are being present and no additional haste is being jammed. This is achievable also thanks to Holy Paladin's Light's Grace talent that at 3 points reduces the base cast time of Holy Light from 2.5 to 2 seconds. Haste also adds to your swings as I've already mentioned. Faster auto attacks would lead to more procs of Seal Wisdom. During those times you can spend activity time on auto hits when there is a very light to none damage taken on the raid. Considering you're equipped with a 1.8 second based mace or sword in raid environment, your swing time will be rounded at about 0.9ish seconds. To calculate your cast time and melee swing timer, you simply have to divide the base cast time of any spell or your base weapon speed respectively by 1 plus your total spell or melee haste respectively divided by 100. There are two factors when it comes to calculating the total spell and melee haste. Haste rating and additional buffs that increase your spell and melee haste by X%. Haste rating stacks additively with itself, and to find out how much spell haste it equals, simply divide your total amount of haste rating by 32.79. Same goes for melee haste, but you have to divide it with 25.21. On the other hand, if you add into this plus 15% spell and melee haste by Judgments of the Pure for example, it stacks multiplicatively. Critical strike rating increases your chance to crit with spells as the bonus is 150% upon critical hit or 154.5% revitalizing Skyflare Diamond metagem. This metagem is suited only for Valithria Dreamwalker counter. At level 80, 1% critical chance equals 45.91 critical rating. To calculate your total spell crit, you have Intellect divided by 166.67 plus crit rating divided by 45.91, and all of this is added into the Paladin's base spell crit chance plus additional spell crit from talents and raid buffs. The Paladin's base spell crit chance before Intellect is 3.33% at level 80. You gain also 5% spell crit chance with 5 points in Holy Power talent, as well as 6% with 3 points in Sanctified Light talent, which adds only to your Holy Light and Holy Shock spells. For raid buffs, Elemental Shaman or Boomkin provides you with an additional 5% spell crit chance through Elemental Oath or Moonkin form respectively. Spell crit chance has also a great impact on Holy Paladin's mana regeneration thanks to Illumination talent. With 5 points, this talent gives you a 100% chance to gain mana each time you crit with Holy Light, Holy Shock or Flash of Light. The mana you gain per critical heal equals 30% of the base mana cost of this spell before any mana reduction effects can be applied to that spell. This basically means that the mana gain for any of the 3 healing spells can trigger the effect is a constant value that equals 382 mana return from Holy Light, 237 mana from Holy Shock and 92 mana from Flash of Light. The more spell crit you have and the more you cast, more mana regeneration Illumination talent will provide. To find how much MP5 each point of crit rating is worth, you need to know how many times you cast each of your healing spells per minute. This is calculated by knowing the total casts and the combat length. Some logs analyses show that 1 point of crit is worth about 0.27 MP5 on average, assuming you're at BS gear. This means that with roughly 55% total spell crit chance, Illumination would be worth about 680ish MP5. You can always play around with Timmy's spreadsheet to find out your values using different gear setups, healing profiles and combat length. Link is in the description below. Illumination talent is your number 1 source of mana gain that doesn't negatively contribute to your healing. Divine Plea halves your healing while it's active, where Seal of Wisdom requires from you to melee swing. Here in the video you can see the formula that converts crit to MP5. You also have to consider the difference between Intellect and MP5. Both stats provide mana but in opposite ways. Intellect provides a static amount of mana increasing your overall mana pool to work with, where MP5 contributes more and more the longer the fight goes on. Because of this, the value of MP5 increases the longer the encounter lasts. Mana from Intellect is available on demand, where you have to wait for MP5. For this reason, you have to understand the differences between static and effective mana pools. The static mana pool is the resource available to you at the start of the encounter before any passive or active regeneration occurs. Effective mana is the total amount of mana available to you during an encounter. To find out your total mana gain and mana spent for a given encounter, simply set a time length and use it to find how much mana you'd spend from casts and how much mana you'd gain from all available sources, including your own and externals that may be applied to you. Again, you can use Timmy's calculator as a tool to do this. To get the most out of your effective mana regeneration, you should never let your mana to cap during any period of combat. If this happens, then you're wasting your MP5 and potentially delaying or wasting any further application of additional mana gains. All this information is important for your gearing choices and decisions. Swap your items from fight to fight to maximize your static and effective mana along with the healing. For final of this chapter, it's worth mentioning hit rating. When hit rating is not a stat healer should care about, Holy Paladin actually benefits from it. Hit rating increases your chance to hit with a judgment cast along with auto attacks. A swing that miss cannot proc seals and in particular Seal of Wisdom. Judgment is also a special attack that is affected by melee hit rating and not spell hit rating. It's important because the hit rating requirement for 1% are different for both statistics, as well as their respective caps. Against level 83 boss targets, the melee hit cap requirement is 8%. 1% melee hit requires 32.79 hit rating, you gain 4% hit thanks to 2 points in Light and Judgment talent. Even with that, you're still 4% behind the cap. Does this mean you should gear your name for the hit rating in order to cap it? In the normal understanding, no. But it could be a decisive factor if rest of the stats of such item are well optimized, and better than an alternative item in that slot that what is the case with Holy Paladin's absolute best in slot pants that contain hit rating, but more on that later. That being said, it is not atypical to see yourself wearing items with hit rating, especially when you are still in the process of gearing up. However, being not hit capped, a good tip here is to use Judgment on adds as well as melee swings if the boss fight contains any, as they are normally in the range from level 80 to level 82, which would increase your chance to successfully hit because the hit cap requirement against those level targets is lower than 8% as you can see in the video. Holy Paladin and Paladin in general as a class has the greatest kit of buffs, spells, abilities and cooldowns that no other class can offer to self and the raid. This gives the Paladin the opportunity to react appropriate to every niche situation where each spell or ability fits a particular such one when paired with its ideal use case. If I have to summarize with a few words, Holy Paladin in particular has an answer against almost every dangerous mechanic that would happen to the raid, excluding the one-shot mechanics caused by ignorance or lack of experience. Paladin offers the raid with buffs such as Blessing of Kings, Might, Wisdom and Sanctuary, and because of this, Paladin is the only class you'd wish to have in raid on all three specializations, as they fill a specific niche because of all the plentiful buffs the class provides. For a better receptivity, I've systemized all Haladin's spells and abilities into 4 categories, the first of which is healing spells. Starting with Holy Light, this is the Holy Paladin's bread and butter spell and the one you're going to spend majority of your activity time. You want to maximize the effective casts of this spell throughout any encounter, as a steady stream of Holy Lights is the best way to keep the tanks and the raid alive. Holy Light is very efficient but very mana costly spell, and also your only source of AoE healing when combined with Glyph of Holy Light. That is a must glyph you'd want to have in any PvE event, and the one that should be hard locked in one of your glyph slots. On top of that, Glyph of Holy Light is also extremely important way to feed into additional Soul Preserver procs for the encounters you would see yourself wearing the trinket, and which will help additionally mitigate the cost of Holy Light. The talents Holy Light benefits from are Healing Light, Divinity, Improved Devotion Aura. These stacks multiplicatively and increase the amount healed from the spell by 12%, 5% and 6% respectively. Holy Shock is an instant cast spell on a 6-second cooldown that works as healing and damaging spell. The amount of healing Holy Shock provides is increased and benefits from the same talent multipliers Holy Light does. Holy Shock is a good emergency heal, and as an instant cast you can sneak in an auto swing whenever you're in the melee range of the boss. This way you're effectively bypassing the negative side of SOW, or to put it simply, you can simultaneously heal while also have the chance to return mana, thus offsetting the mana cost of the spell. That being said, in these situations where you can safely stay in melee range of the boss, Holy Shock becomes extremely mana efficient if you also consider the Seal of Wisdom proc chance per auto swing, for which I'll explain later in the chapter. Holy Shock is also your best heal to use when on move minus Lay on Hands, which brings you to the second effect of the spell. Thanks to Infusion of Life talent, each time you crit with Holy Shock spell, you gain a buff that increases the critical chance of your next Holy Light cast by 20% or makes Flash of Light an instant cast. The latter one provides a good combo for emergency heal, and especially when you're on move, as in this regard Holy Paladin is the most ineffective healer together with Resto Shamans. And when Flash of Light amount of healing is very mediocre, there is nothing better to use as a heal if you have to run a longer distance while Nitro Boots are on cooldown. Nevertheless, you do not play around the Infusion of Light proc too much, nor does it majorly affect your decision making. It's just a nice bonus whenever you need to Holy Shock, move or gain one additional free auto swing. Flash of Light is Holy Paladin's fastest heal in the kit of spells. Although the spell is very mana efficient, the amount of heal the spell does is somewhat very mediocre and low enough not to respond very well to boss damage patterns in majority of the time, as well as not appropriate for sustaining tank's health. That being said, Flash of Light is not appropriate to be used as a steady stream of spam. In comparison, Holy Light on the Divine Plea effect still provides more healing than Flash of Light, which once more speaks very negatively for the spell. Thanks to Infusion of Life talent, when Flash of Light is casted on a target affected by Sacred Shield, a hot is placed on that target that ticks 12 times each second as the base total amount equals the amount healed from Flash of Light. The hot also double dips with Divinity and improved Devotion Aura talents, but this is still not enough to make Flash of Light a viable choice to work with. Then you may ask in which situations Flash of Light has an application. Well, as far as it goes, I see 3 major scenarios Flash of Light has potential. First, as a pre-pull setup to place that hot on the Sacred Shielded target, usually main tank. Second, as an instant cast when Infusion of Light procs for situations you are on the move or you want to squeeze an additional auto attack to only if current damage dealt by the boss responds well to Flash of Light as a niche spell to use. Otherwise, you may want to spend the proc by increasing the crit chance of Holy Light. And third, as a very efficient and fastest way of stacking Meteorite Crystal Trinket, whenever you see if the fight has any noticeable gaps or downtime where the tank damage taken or raid damage taken is very low. This way you can gain the maximum from the trinket while you spend very low mana to do so. Lay on Hands is your most powerful healing spell that has a very long cooldown of 20 minutes that can be further reduced to 11 minutes thanks to Glyph of Lay on Hands that is Holy Paladin's only must-have minor glyph, as well as 2 points in improved Lay on Hands. The latter also turns the spell into a defensive cooldown, providing the target with 20% damage reduction against physical damage for 15 seconds when Lay on Hands is being used. Don't be afraid to use this spell as often as possible, despite its long cooldown, especially in situations your tank is in danger of dying by boss melee attacks, what might be the case on Lich King and Halion encounters. Unlike other healing spells, Lay on Hands does not benefit from spell power, and its base healing equals the caster's total amount of health. The amount of healing Lay on Hands provides is also increased by Divinity and improved devotional talents. In addition, when used, the spell power will grant its target with 1950 mana. Sacred Shield is technically not a healing spell, but instead it absorbs damage. Sacred Shield is Holy Paladin's second mana most efficient spell in the kit. The only talent the spell benefits from is Divine Guardian talent, that at 2 points doubles the duration from 30 seconds to 1 minute, as well as multiplicatively increases the amount absorbed by 20%. There are some mechanics you should consider on how Sacred Shield does work. Only one Sacred Shield can be active on a target at a time, and Paladin can have only one Sacred Shield active on a target at a time. In this regard, the spell works exactly like the Earth Shield of Resto Shaman. When the Sacred Shielded target receives damage, a second buff, also called Sacred Shield, is present on him and lasts 12 seconds or until the shield's amount is absorbed. The amount of absorption does not stack with itself and cannot occur more than once every 6 seconds. While the secondary Sacred Shield buff is on, Paladin's crit chance for Flash of Light spell is increased by 50%. Sacred Shield is an extremely powerful spell that provides a ton of absorption over its duration, and you want to always keep and maintain it on your assigned player, usually the main tank. Because Sacred Shield scales with spell power, Holy Paladin's one is the most effective and offers the highest amount of absorption. Beacon of Light is Holy Paladin's 51st talent point in Holy Tree and the spell that makes the spec super powerful in Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Beacon of Light allows you to simultaneously heal 2 targets. You can place Beacon on any party raid member, and the spell lasts 1 minute or 1.5 minutes when glyphed. A Holy Paladin can have only one Beacon of Light active on a target at a time, but unlike Sacred Shield, there is no limit of how many beacons the target can receive, in scenario you have more than one Holy Paladin in the raid. You always want to use it on the target that takes the most consistent damage during a fight, and it's usually the main tank. Beacon of Light is by far your most mana efficient spell, although indirectly. This is because the spell does not provide any amount of heal on its own, but instead Beacon of Light will duplicate any amount of heal you do with Holy Light, Holy Shock, Flash of Light or Lay on Hands. Any glyph or talent effects that do heal, as well as Judgement of Light and Trinket heals, will not be duplicated through Beacon of Light. You never want to directly heal your beacon target, because this will not cause any duplicated heal to occur. An exception from this rule is Lay on Hands spell, where you want to use it as a damage reduction cooldown on the main tank affected by your beacon, but only if you're expecting to improve Lay on Hands talent. Here, I'd like to point out that the amount of heal caused by Beacon of Light follows our positive and negative rules of self and personal healing boosting multipliers. For example, the 5% bonus heal receiving from the secondary effect of Divinity talent will not be transferred to Beacon, but if the target affected by Beacon has any such heal receiving multipliers caused by talents or effects, they will be added to the final amount healed. Beacon of Light is also your most mana expensive spell in the kit, so it's not a good idea to refresh it before it's worn off, unless in situations you know you may not have that chance to spend a global cooldown to do so because of massive damage taken on the raid. In addition, try to avoid or minimize the need of having to swap it a lot before it's worn off. Moving on to second category of abilities, we have mana and healing cooldowns. First, I will start with Seal of Wisdom, or SOW for short. When SOW is active, each time you do a successful melee attack, you have a chance to return 4% from your total mana pool. This is also the reason why you want to stay in melee range of the boss whenever it's possible. The effect is PPM, or procs per minute based, that is normalized at 4 second base weapon speed. This means that a 4 second two-hand weapon will give you a 100% chance to proc SOW with each successful melee attack. If you divide 60 seconds time by 4 seconds base weapon speed, you get a base PPM of 15 for SOW. Here I'd like to point out that the haste does not increase the chance per auto swing to trigger the mana proc, despite the fact that haste reduces the weapon speed. What haste does is to increase the number of melee attacks you can do per given time, thus increasing the number of SOV procs you can gain. With a 1.8 second weapon, which are the most spell power one-handers in Wrath of the Lich King, you'll have a 45% chance per successful swing to proc Seal of Wisdom. You find that chance from dividing your base weapon speed by 4. To give you an example of how the proc's effective PPM is being calculated, let's assume that you add enough haste to reduce the swing timer to 1 second. Then you have 60 seconds divided by 1 second, and the result is multiplied by 0.45 chance to trigger the SOW. This will give you 27 procs per minute, assuming no hit rating or expertise is being taken into consideration, because swings that miss, dodge or parry cannot return mana. Lastly, a judgment cast has also the chance to trigger SOW, as the proc rate follows all the rules I've already explained. Try to use judgment cast as often as you can when you are on move, but bear in mind that the spell puts you in a 1.5 second global cooldown that can be sometimes of fatal decision making if it leads to the death of your tank or some raid member. Next is Judgement of Wisdom. For the next 20 seconds after Judgement of Wisdom is being casted, each successful attack against the target has a chance to return 2% from your base mana. This gives you 87 mana return regardless of the total mana pool you have. Unlike Seal of Wisdom, Judgement of Wisdom is not PPM based, but instead the proc rate appears to be a fixed chance of around 50% per strike, regardless of the weapon speed you're equipped with. And since I brought up Judgement of Wisdom, I'd like to take time and speak about Judgement of Light, despite the fact it's a healing spell and should not be in this category of spells and abilities. Judgement of Light has the same proc rate as Judgement of Wisdom, as each successful attack against the target heals the attacker for 2% from their maximum health. Judgement of Light alone provides a very powerful source of passive healing to the raid that is not comparable to any other healing effect in this category. For this reason, Judgement of Light is often liked by community as the last healer in the raid. There is a misconception that is still spreading out by the community that Holy Paladin provides more healing with Judgement of Light because the effect scales with Divinity talent. This is true and applies only to paladins with the active Divinity talent, but not to the raid. That being said, the only healing multipliers Judgement of Light scales with are Improved Devotion Aura or Tree of Life and ICC buff, and these are all raid-wide buffs. On top of that, the healing from Judgement of Light is further increased by personal healing boosts. To put it simply, Judgement of Light heals the raid for an equal amount regardless of the paladin's specialization. For this reason, it's the best to always assign a Retribution or a Protection Paladin to use Judgement of Light. This way you can ensure 100% uptime of that debuff on the boss, because Judgment is part of the rotation. Divine Plea is Holy Paladin's best mana return cooldown. It has a 1 minute cooldown and ticks 5 times over 15 seconds. Each tick returns 5% from the mana pool for a total of 25%. The downside of this effect is that your healing with Holy Light, Holy Shock and Flash of Light is reduced by 50% while Divine Plea is active. This is a mechanic you'll be playing around on almost every single fight, and as such you have to plan when to use Divine Plea. In general, you have to think ahead and see if the fight has any noticeable gaps or downtime where the damage taken on the raid is low or none. Such example is on daily Deathwhisper during first phase between ad spawn. Other situations where you can use a completely free Divine Plea without any penalty is in scenarios where it will be disabled by boss mechanics for a longer period of time, such as Frost Tomb on Sindragosa. Be sure to use Divine Plea when you see you're marked by Tomb, and in general in air phase of this encounter, which gives you a very convenient opportunity to Plea and SOW the Tombs. On many fights, however, there won't be any downtime, and you have to Divine Plea during regular damage phases just to ensure that you don't go out of mana before the fight ends. In this case, there are two ways to offset the 50% healing reduction from Divine Plea. First, by using a high throughput healing cooldown such as Avenging Wrath or Divine Illumination. The latter requires to have 2 pieces from tier 10 set equipped. Keep in mind that all healing increasing reduction cooldowns stack multiplicatively, meaning that even in these very occasional scenarios where you might be forced to combine Wings and Divine Illumination together with Divine Plea, you will still not be able to completely negate the 50% penalty from Divine Plea, but instead you will heal for 81% from the normal healing. The second method you can use to somewhat offset the negative effect of Divine Plea is by using a defensive cooldown such as Divine Guardian or Hand of Sacrifice if the primary source of damage dealt by the boss is concentrated on the tanks. All in all, my advice is, try to minimize the need of using Divine Plea as much as possible, as it contributes very negatively to your overall healing done, especially in these situations you'd be forced to use a throughput cooldown to partially offset the 50% loss in healing, and which cooldown you would otherwise use to boost your healing for these periods. That being said, always use mana potions or mana injectors and try to maximize your gameplay with Seal of Wisdom, and don't be afraid to ask for external mana cooldowns such as Innervates, Mana Tide and even Hymn of Hope. Divine Illumination is also your second best mana cooldown. For the next 15 seconds after the spell is being used, the mana cost of your spells is reduced by 50%. Unlike other mana reduction multipliers that normally are being applied and take effect as a last value in the equation, Divine Illumination is instead the first source of mana reduction to be calculated. To put it simple, by giving an example with Holy Light, Divine Illumination halves the base mana cost of the spell from 1274 to 637, and then the Libram of Renewal is being subtracted for an end result of 524 mana cost. If you add into this also the 5% mana reduction from Glyph of Seal of Wisdom, you get 497 mana cost for Holy Light. When normally you'd want to use Divine Illumination on cooldown, 2 pieces tier 10 bonus, as I already mentioned, turns the spell into Holy Paladin's best healing cooldown, which gives you not the easy task to plan ahead of how when to use Divine Illumination the best in order to get the maximum benefit from effects this cooldown provides you with. Divine Favor is one of those cooldowns that sometimes ask myself why such are even in the game. And I'm not kidding, because it's just a very poor replication of Resto Shaman's Tidal Force. It's a complete waste of a talent point that otherwise would have taken a good place as a second point in Blessed Hands, but unfortunately, Divine Favor talent is required in order to get access to Holy Shock spell. Basically, what this cooldown does is to ensure that you will critically hit with the next Holy Light, Holy Shock or Flash of Light spell. Because of this, Divine Favor somehow loses its value the more crit you have, since you wouldn't know if you were going to crit regardless of whether or not Divine Favor was active. It also has a very long cooldown of 2 minutes for what actually this ability offers. That being said, the best way to use this cooldown is just to macro it to a Holy Light spell. This way you can ensure that Divine Favor will be used whenever it's off cooldown. Divine Favor also guarantees an Illumination proc, so this is one more reason to do so. Arcane Torrent is a racial ability that is typical only for Blood Elf race. Blood Elves are by far the best Holy Paladin race for PvE, and the only one available if you have decided to join the Horde side. Arcane Torrent has a cooldown of 2 minutes, and when used you gain 6% from the total mana pool, meaning it returns a surprisingly significant amount of mana, especially with high levels of gear. Arcane Torrent is worth about 100 MP5 with nearly BIS gear when used on cooldown. This racial has also another effect that is an AoE silence for 2 seconds, turning it into good utility that no other class shares, and is a major boon to the Paladin class, which has no interrupts or silences otherwise. The third category of spells and abilities are defensive cooldowns, starting with Divine Shield and Divine Protection as Paladin's self-defensive cooldowns. Divine Shield, also known as Bubble, makes you immune against any type of damage, including falling damage and even drowning damage for 12 seconds, which in PvE scenario can be used to avoid having to move for a mechanic or cheesing certain mechanics. Divine Shield does not wipe threat, but mobs will ignore paladins under the influence of Bubble unless there is no other valid targets for them. It is possible to use Divine Shield and then immediately taunt the enemy to force the boss to stay on the invulnerable paladin as long as the taunt lasts. This can be a good response to Lich King's Enrage if someone has died in Frostmourne Chamber, but usually hunters would do the better job here and they are overall better kiters. Divine Shield is also a good way to completely ignore the damage reduction of Hand of Sacrifice or Divine Sacrifice. The spell has a long cooldown of 5 minutes, so for majority of the encounters, Bubble can be used only once per boss fight. Divine Protection is the second self-defensive ability on a shorter cooldown of 3 minutes. It reduces all damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds. Use it whenever you think you would be in danger of receiving burst damage. Unlike abilities that make you immune against damage taken like Divine Shield or Hand of Protection in case of physical damage taken, damage reduction cooldowns like Divine Protection does not help against the damage reduction of Hand of Sacrifice or Divine Sacrifice. That being said, it's a complete waste of an otherwise powerful cooldown to be used for that. Unless the caster suffers for external damage taken on top of that, this way Divine Protection will help for partially reducing the total damage the paladin receives. Hand of Protection or HOP for short is also a very powerful cooldown that has a lot of applications in PvE. This ability can be given to any party raid member including yourself, and it lasts for 10 seconds on a 5-minute cooldown that is reduced to 3 minutes with 2 points in Guardian's favor talent. While under HOP effect, the target is completely immune against physical or falling damage, but the downside is that the target is also unable to use any kind of physical damage including swings and physical abilities. In this line of thoughts, Judgment is also considered to be a physical ability and cannot be used while HOP is active. For this reason, avoid to give Hand of Protection on melees and hunters unless it's really necessary to do so. People protected, however, can still cast spells. It can be used on casters to remove Boiling Blood debuff on DPS encounter. This way, you will slow down the blood power gains the boss has by delaying the very first mark as much as possible. HOP can be used also on any healer for Blistering Coil on Sindragosa fight. Specifically, it will prevent the boss to pull them while they can still stand and heal the raid. Hand of Protection has a good application to be used on a caster damage dealer like Boomkin as a preventive measure for when the tanks pull huge amount of trash. This way, that DPS will be immune of targeting while also losing aggro on top of that. When it comes to Holy Paladin, you can use HOP on self and completely negate the damage transfer from Hand of Sacrifice given to the tank or Divine Sacrifice in situations where the tank or the party suffers from physical type of damage. This is a good combination to be used against bosses that deal a huge amount of damage with auto attacks like Lich King or Halion. The downside is that during this time you will be unable to return mana from Seal of Wisdom as well as unable to cast Judgment, so plan your remaining duration of Judgments with the pure haste buff not to lose it. Bear in mind that each time you use Divine Shield or Divine Protection as well as the Hand of Protection or Lay on Hands, you gain a Forbearance debuff that prevents you of using these spells again on yourself for the next 2 minutes. In addition, you're also unable to use Wings within 30 seconds of being the target of one of the spells mentioned and vice versa. Hand of Sacrifice is a core defensive ability that you will mostly use to feed the main tank with. What this cooldown basically does is to reduce the damage taken of this target by 30%, and that amount of damage reduced is redirected to the caster. Hand of Sacrifice has a 2-minute cooldown and lasts 12 seconds or until the caster has transferred 100% of their maximum health. Blessed Hands talent increases the damage transfer to 35% and 40% with 1 and 2 points respectively, as well as the talent contains a secondary hidden effect that increases the transfer cap of Hand of Sacrifice to 125% and 150% of the caster's total amount of health with 1 and 2 points respectively. Use Hand of Sacrifice whenever your tank asks for it and in general for situations where a predictable burst incoming damage is about to hit your tank, such as Soul Reaper ability of Lich King, or when you have to move and will not be able to heal the tank. Such example is on Halion fight, when you have to move to the other side of the boss to avoid Meteor Strike. Divine Sacrifice and the followed secondary buff, Divine Guardian, are very powerful defensive cooldowns, as the latter one is raid-wide and the best in the category. Divine Sacrifice, for the most part, does work similar to Hand of Sacrifice, with the exception that 30% of the party's damage taken is redirected to the caster, and the cap of the damage transfer equals 40% of the paladin's total amount of health multiplied by the number of the party members, or to put it simply, twice the paladin's health assuming a full party. As this sounds really scary for Holy Paladin, Divine Sacrifice also offers the defensive mechanic for it that will break the effect when the paladin's health drops on the 20%. But don't really rely on this because the damage transfer can batch and leapfrog the 20% HP barrier and kill you, especially if you suffer from external damage on top of that. While in most of the scenarios you'd want to cancel or Divine Sacrifice via macro, you should always consider to combine it with Bubble or HOP, depending on the type of the damage and for these situations in which you'd find to be beneficial for the party to leave Divine Sacrifice active. Because of the party-only effect of Divine Sacrifice, placing healers in tanks group for extra defensive cooldown is another strategy that can be used for some challenges like 2 healing 0% Lich King, where you can mitigate damage from the Infest and Soul Reaper at the same time, thus most efficiently use both Divine Sacrifice and Divine Guardian. Aura Mastery is Holy Paladin's second best raid-wide cooldown that lasts 6 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. When used, it will double the effect of your current aura that you're using, but only the base effect, not including any talented upgrades. For example, the plus armor gained from the improved Devotion aura talent will not be doubled. When combined with some of the resistance auras, and specifically Shadow, Frost and Fire, Aura Mastery will increase the resistance gained from the aura to 260. Without going into full details of how the resistance system works in Wrath of the Lich King, as it is a bit more complicated, I will provide you with the most basic information you'd like to know of how to calculate the expected and approximate damage reduction from resistances. Against 83 level bosses, you have to take the resistance value found in your character sheet divided by the sum of the resistance value plus 510. The results show that the expected damage reduction against that type of the spell damage is approximately 20% on average, increased to 33% damage reduction when Aura Mastery is being used. Normally, each caster being damage dealer or healer has a talent that provides them with 70% reduce of pushback suffered from damaging attacks while casting spells. The concentration aura of Paladin provides the ray with additional 35%, which is more than enough to remove the pushback suffered and completely neglect any plus milliseconds casters get to the completion of their casts. When Aura Mastery is used with Concentration Aura, however, it will make the raid immune to any silence or interrupt effects. This combination is very powerful against Deafening Roar ability of Yoxeron hard mode in third phase or against Staggering Stomp ability of Gormak the Impaler in TOGC. The last category is the one with additional utilities. Here you have abilities such as Hand of Freedom, Hand of Salvation and stun effects. Hand of Freedom removes and makes its target immune against any movement impairing effect for 10 seconds on a 25-second cooldown. It has some niche applications in endgame such as Halion fight for soul consumption debuff in Twilight Realm. Another application of Hand of Freedom is on Sindragosa fight, where the main tank receives a stackable movement speed reduction with each Frost Breath casted from the boss. Because this debuff cannot be dispelled, Hand of Freedom comes in handy, helping and giving an opportunity to your main tank to hide behind the Frost Tomb as fast as possible before the first bomb hits the ground during air phase, or for tanks swapping in case you're using two tanks when still progressing that boss. Hand of Salvation does exactly what the ability says. Reduces threat or specifically 2% each second for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Blessed Hands talent increases the threat reduction per second to 3% and 4% with 1 and 2 points in that talent respectively. In raids, a common target of your Hand of Salvation will be fire mages. Remember that a player may only have one hand buff on them per paladin at a time. These include Hand of Protection, Sacrifice, Freedom and Salvation. Hammer of Justice is a single target stun that you can use to stun and interrupt any mob that is not immune for stun effects. An interesting fact is that this ability will still interrupt casting even if such mob is immune to the stun due to diminishing returns. Hammer of Justice has an occasional use for some raid encounters with adds as well as on trash. Such example is Beasts on DBS encounter. Hammer of Justice can also be used to stun any mind control player on Lady Deathwhisper fight. On the other side, Holy Wrath is an AoE instant stun for undeads and demons. This makes the ability very useful in ICC considering the majority of the trash and bosses are undead type of mods. Its common application is to be used against Valkyries on Lich King fight. It's no secret that Holy Paladin is one of the easiest healers to learn when it comes just to healing, but the class can become difficult to master if you want to unleash the full potential of Holy Paladin by learning how to properly use all the wide range of spells, abilities and cooldowns in the right time, as well as target selection and unenviable task of triage. This of course requires a good knowledge on the class and boss mechanics in order to react and anticipate any possible lethal damage that can happen to the raid, tank or self by using healing or defensive cooldowns. Beacon of Light ensures that no matter who you heal, you will always be healing the tank, which means that on single tank fights you will assist in raid healing, while in multi-tank fights you will generally be healing multiple tanks simultaneously. Unfortunately, Holy Paladin's actual healing toolkit is still very small and limited primarily to Holy Light, where Flash of Light and Holy Shock are more used as a buffer and filler spells for specific situations or emergency. However, there is an additional depth in managing your target selection as well as healing cooldowns, particularly to maximize Glyph of Holy Light and therefore some item effects like Soul Preserver Trinket, Valanir or even Trauma if you're wearing some of these items by increasing their proc rates or efficiency. Holy Paladin is also one of the most mana constrained healers in the game, and this requires constant monitoring of your mana and decision making to see what trade-offs and risks you can afford to make sure your mana can last a fight. This is because all methods you can use to return mana have an adverse impact on your healing, minus the free mana gained from Illumination talent and item effects. As every healer in the game, Holy Paladin does not have a set rotation, but instead the heal you choose to use will depend on few factors because, as I've already mentioned, Holy Paladin's selection is small and therefore a much smaller part of decision making than target selection and triage. That being said, since Holy Paladin is not offering a strong AoE healing, for the most part you have to keep a close eye on the health of multiple targets and making a split second decision whether to use Holy Light or Holy Shock and Flash of Light as emergency heal or when you are on move as well as any cooldown. As a pre-pro setup, you want to be sure that you have used Beacon of Light and Second Shield on the tank roughly 10 seconds before the boss engage. Due to the very high cost of Beacon of Light, as well as the long durations of both of these buffs, it's ideal to precast these before combat begins. This way you'll have enough time to drink and offset the mana cost of these spells and start a fight with full mana. Getting the Light Grace buff up before boss pull by doing a random Holy Light cast is very important and may depend on the way the boss is being triggered. Bosses like Lord Marrowgar, for example, will activate immediately the tank enters their aggro range, where bosses like Deathbringer Saurfang or Lich King are pulled on a timer basis, and therefore you can start a Holy Light cast about 1 second before the encounter starts and cover the very first hit by the boss. When the boss is engaged, you want to use Judgment to proc Judgments of the pure haste buff on you. In some rare cases, you may want to slightly delay your first Judgment cast if the boss starts with heavy auto attacks, what might be the case with Lich King. I personally do 3 Holy Light casts and then use Judgment on the boss. This way I can sync that Judgment with nearly start of the very first Infest cast by the boss, while still have enough time left to precast the Holy Light for that Infest. After this, Holy Paladin's gameplay mainly revolves around mana management, while doing a steady stream of Holy Light casts. During low periods of damage, you can use Divine Plea and SOW more frequently to gain mana. If you have to move and there is nothing to heal or your instant heals are on cooldown, be sure to always use Judgment. This way you have that chance to return mana from SOW as well as refreshing the haste buff on you. Try to use and combine your Wings or Divine Illumination with GTS or Valanir proc in case you're wearing some of these items for maximum efficiency, and in general always when tanks or raids suffer from severe damage. In such situations, you may consider using Divine Guardian and or Aura Mastery for additional raid damage mitigation or Hand of Sacrifice on the tank. Holy Paladin has a very restricted set of useful glyphs that are almost not subject to change. Starting with Glyph of Holy Light, by far the best glyph that you should always consider and the one that should be hard locked in one of your glyph slots. Not only is Holy Light your bread and butter spell, but this glyph adds an AoE healing to your strongest heal by essentially multiplying its healing by up to 50% or up to 10% per target. This is because the glyph has a very unique mechanic, meaning the base amount of heal the glyph provides depends on the ratio effective heal to overheal of each Holy Light cast you do. If the effective heal of your Holy Light's normal hit is at or more than 50% of the amount overhealed, the glyph will proc for 10% of the effective heal per target, but if it's less than 50%, it will proc for the 10% of the full amount of Holy Light. The same goes for critical hits with Holy Light, but the threshold here is 66% and not 50%. However, while this mechanic of the glyph is not completely dynamic, it still restricts and balances the healing you can do per Holy Light cast following the simple logic. If you overheal too much with Holy Light, you will be compensated with more AoE healing and vice versa. In addition, the amount healed by Glyph of Holy Light double dips with Divinity and improved Devotion Aura talents, as well as ICC buff, Valithria Dreamwalker stacks, Wings and Divine Illumination. If used properly and at the right time, Holy Paladin's healing cooldowns can really contribute to a very strong AoE healing, especially when some of the other multipliers are also present. Glyph of Holy Light is also the main reason Soul Preserver Trinket is the most powerful for Holy Paladin, as the glyph provides a constant heal on many targets at once, therefore this creates a great environment for more procs to occur, since the trinket has a 2% chance per target heal to proc. That being said, you can hit up to 7 targets with a single Holy Light cast if Beacon of Light is also considered. Moving on to the second major glyph, and this is Glyph of Beacon of Light. Beacon of Light is very expensive to refresh considering the mana cost of the spell. The glyph effectively reduces the cost of Beacon of Light up to 33%, but only specific circumstances and fight lengths, and therefore it's not always good or even useful because its value will depend on the less number of beacons cast you do for a given encounter in comparison to no glyph used. For example, if the boss fight lasts 2 minutes, you ain't going to get any value from the glyph because regardless of whether or not you use it, you will still have to cast beacon twice. From here, you can draw a conclusion. The longer the fight is, the more value you will get from this glyph. In an average scenario, however, Glyph of Beacon of Light saves you some GCDs and mana. Glyph of Seal of Wisdom is Holy Paladin's third glyph you want to use almost all the time. Mana is the only constraint for Holy Paladin, and Glyph of Seal of Wisdom plays a big part of reducing that strain. Considering that you will almost always want to have Seal of Wisdom active, and due to the insane mana return we get by melee attacks, Glyph of Seal of Wisdom just makes it even better. The glyph reduces the mana cost of your healing spells including Holy Light, Beacon of Light, Holy Shock and Flash of Light. The glyph is applied as the last multiplier in the equation, meaning it reduces the current mana cost of a spell by 5% and not the base mana cost. However, for Valithria Dreamwalker fight, you may want to consider a full throughput build in order to maximize every bit of healing done. Besides gear swap, you may want to also swap Glyph of Seal of Wisdom with Glyph of Seal of Light. On this encounter, mana is not an issue due to Twisted Nightmare stacks that not only increase your healing done, but also provides you with 333 MP5 per stack. Glyph of Seal of Light gives another 5% multiplier to boost your healing with. I'd like to point out that Glyph of Seal of Light does not double dip with the amount healed by Glyph of Holy Light, but in some very occasional scenarios, Glyph of Seal of Light might help to cross the threshold defining the amount of healing the Glyph of Holy Light is going to proc for, and therefore proccing off the full amount of Holy Light casted instead of the effective healing. Sindragosa is another encounter where basically the mana should not be an issue for Holy Paladin due to the noticeable gaps and downtime the boss offers during air phase and unchained magic mechanic. That being said, this fight gives you a great opportunity to swap and dance between seals in order to maximize healing and longevity. The good news, Valithria Dreamwalker and Sindragosa are part of Frostwing Hold in Icecrown Citadel, as such it follows to defeat them one after another, so a simple swap rotation of glyphs for the entire duration of the raid will not cost you too much if you want to min-max. While minor glyphs for Holy Paladin are all personal preference, some of them still have an impact to your healing as well as longevity. Such one is Glyph of Lay on Hands, that is the only minor glyph you'd want to always have, and it reduces the cooldown of the spell by 5 minutes. Glyph of Blessing of Kings and Glyph of Device add very little to your mana longevity and are very situational in this regard. Glyph of Blessing of Kings reduces the mana cost of King's buff by 50%, which would save you some mana in case you have to buff someone who is being resurrected mid-fight. Glyph of Device, on the other side, reduces the mana cost of Seal of Wisdom by 50%, which again saves you some mana for when you have to seal swap if Glyph of Seal of Light is also used, or in case you have been resurrected mid-fight and have to rebuff yourself. It's also worth mentioning here Glyph of Sense Undead. While Holy Paladin's damage is not important and is so low as negligible, 1% from negligible is still more than 0, especially when you will be using judgment casts and melee attacks occasionally, so this is still a free benefit. Professions give you unique benefits in the form of extra stats, utilities, procs, or crafting to help you maximize your gameplay or focus on the economic aspect of the game and simply earn gold. In the case of Holy Paladin, generally speaking, you want to maximize your intellect and haste rating. For the sake of this video, I will not go over all professions and their pros and cons, but instead I will give you the top 2 professions that I consider to be the best for endgame Holy Paladin. First on the list is Engineering, which is a best-in-slot profession for almost all the classes, and Holy Paladin is not an exception. The profession is also the best one to pick up for speedrunning purposes. That being said, Engineering offers a wide range of additional utilities and consumables that will help you and the raid to get through this more efficiently in order to reduce that next second of time, and not only. Starting with the least benefit from Engineering that Holy Paladins basically ignore, and this is Springy Arachnoweave Cloak, enchant known as the Parachute. The enchant provides you with 27 spell power as well as an ability to slow fall on a 1 minute cooldown. The Parachute has no real applications in PvE, and the spell power gain is not really attractive for Holy Paladin, especially when you have the option to stick with 23 haste enchant as the better one here. Nitro Boost is a boots enchant and greatly increase the run speed for 5 seconds on a 3 minute cooldown. This enchant also provides you with 24 crit rating. Outside of speedruns, where this enchant is primarily used to move faster from trash packs to trash packs or to the boss, it allows you for easy avoiding and handling of certain boss mechanics such as defile on Lich King fight or just to get your position faster during a boss fight. Hyperspeed Acceleration on the other side is a gloves enchant that gives 340 haste rating for 12 seconds on a 1 minute cooldown. It's a very good addition to Holy Paladin's kit of cooldowns, and as such, you'd want to activate this enchant as often as possible, be it to increase the healing throughput or simply regenerate mana via Seal of Wisdom. Engineering also allows you to craft and drink runic mana injectors that give 25% more mana per use compared to the normal runic mana potions. The gain is worth 1075 mana on average. Converting this mana to MP5 depends on the duration of the encounter, since you can use only one potion per combat lockout. And finally, Engineering allows for crafting and using of Serenite Bombs and Global Thermal Sapper charges as an additional damage to trash mobs. For Holy Paladin these are not as much important as for DPS classes, but keep in mind to bring a stack of these in case you are going to do a speedrun. If I have to summarize, Engineering is the only profession that provides with 4 secondary stats that Holy Paladin benefits from simultaneously. More spell power for Cloak Enchant, which in general Holy Paladin does not take advantage from, but it's still there as an option. Then we have plus Haste Rating from Glove Enchant, and more crit rating from Boots Enchant, and finally plus MP5 from Injectors. The second profession you want to have is Jewelcrafting. Jewelcrafting allows you to cut special gems that have stat bonuses that exceed the standard gems. These gems are different cuts of Dragon's Eye, and only 3 such gems can be equipped at a time. Generally speaking, Jewelcrafting is a very suitable profession that gives you a wide range of options to maximize the stats more efficiently when building different gear setups or simply swapping items. In this line of thoughts, having duplicated items is a common strategy for lots of classes, which gives them an opportunity to gem and enchant these items in different ways in order to maximize the throughput per boss fight basis by swapping them. When it comes to Holy Paladin, sometimes you'd want to have more haste, especially for these encounters. You can stay in melee range of the boss, but sometimes this is not quite possible or not the best optimal position to take, and then more intellect always comes in handy. That being said, you may consider having duplicates of your BIS chest, gloves and boots, because these contain at least 2 gem sockets, and the most important, they're easy to obtain because these items are play type of armor and practically uncontested by other classes. The stat priority I've given are based on equivalency point system, or EP for short. The EP values are not based on simple stats ratio, but on the value of each stat on your gear. In short, it determines how much each stat of yours is worth 1 point of spell power. Because of this, it is accepted spell power to be always normalized to the value of 1 for a better receptivity. Keep in mind that EP system is very relative in value because it depends on many factors that would impact the player and the environment during a boss fight. This means that additional factors such as fight length, difficulty of the content, healing and mana profiles, or even the number of healers in the raid can significantly change the value of your stats. Intellect and MP5, for example, as stats that are responsible for longevity, shift in value, and you will find these to have higher values in the start of your journey of gearing up or in a longer fight such as Lich King. Because of this, I've given an average EP values by playing around with different healing and mana profiles, as well as gear setups and combat lengths, and these I consider to represent the Holy Paladin's gameplay the best. That being said, the defined EP values are: for spell power MP5 is 1, for intellect 1.4, for haste rating 1.3, for crit rating 0.9, and for hit rating 0.2. These EP values consider additional own and external mana gains you would benefit from during a raid. Effects like Seal of Wisdom, Replenishment, Revitalize, Rapture, Mana Tide, and their uptimes during an encounter affect the value of intellect. The more you have, the more mana these effects will contribute. Innervate and Mana Potion should be also considered when calculating your mana longevity, and these affect primarily the value of MP5. On the other hand, Haste is by far Holy Paladin's best throughput stat, but as such, it also follows the general rule that the more haste you have, the more casts you'll make per a given time, and thus the more mana you'll spend. This means the more haste you have, the more longevity you have to ensure, not letting any additional drops in healing uptime to happen. This primarily applies for these encounters. You would see yourself staying in range of the boss, or no downtimes happen that would let you regen mana from Seal Wisdom. The pure spell power stat does not really have a direct relationship to your mana longevity, aside from calculating your healing per mana spent or HPM. Hit rating is a useful stat for Holy Paladin, and its main purpose is to increase the mana return from Seal Wisdom by reducing the chance to miss with swings in Judgment. That being said, the EP value of 0.2 considers only 4% you get from Enlightened Judgment's talent, and therefore hit rating quickly loses its value to 0 the more you have and until the 8% melee hit cap is reached. Assuming that you wear Plaguebringer stained pants, the EP value of the stat drops to about 0.05 as these pants alone does not hard hit cap you. Use these EP values as a starting point to build your gear. Remember that the value of Intellect and MP5 depends significantly on the duration of the encounter, while the value of the rest of the stats revolve around Holy Paladin's healing throughput. After I clear this up, let's move now to the gearing part and best in slot itemization in endgame. Shortly, I'm going to present you the EP scores of all available loot for Holy Paladin from ICC and RS, so you can better estimate and prioritize the items you're able to obtain. The spreadsheet is also available in the description of the video, so check it out. However, don't blindly take the priority of these items based on their rank in the table, but think more comprehensively based on the rest of your gear and the stat you're currently aiming for the most. For example, if an item with crit and MP5 scores slightly more than an item with haste and MP5 in a given gear slot, estimate and weigh all pros and cons for your healing throughput and mana regen when comparing each of them. It's also important to know that EP scores in the tables are resolved by using the best combination of gems that will math out the highest AP scores for each of them. That being said, the real EP scores for some of the items might slightly differ according to the way you would gem them. It's not a secret that Holy Paladin is the easiest healer to gear up. The reasons for this are few, and the first one is that Holy Paladin is the only plate healer, and therefore plate items with Intellect are uncontested by other classes. Holy Paladin is also a healer that doesn't require a high level of gear in order to be able to heal heroic endgame content and be competitive. While Holy Light scales pretty well with spell power, the spell alone hits high enough, providing a reliable amount of healing against the hardest content in game even at lower levels of this stat. Everything Holy Paladin really needs is to ensure a decent amount of haste rating for a good, consistent and frequent wave of Holy Light casts, as well as enough intellect and overall longevity to keep up and support him in this task. That being said, when still in process of gearing up, Holy Paladin often aims for a well optimized pieces of gear with proper stats rather than a higher item level ones. The next advantage is Holy Paladin is also the only healer who aims for just 2 pieces of tier 10 set, and this reduces the amount of emblems you'll be needing tremendously, as these require a significant amount of time to obtain since there is a limit of maximum frost emblems you can earn per week. You may ask why not Forced Bonus. Forced Bonus reduces the base casting time of the next Holy Light cast by additional 0.3 seconds after each Holy Shock cast. This set bonus is fairly weak and highly inconsistent in its contribution to your healing that requires from you to use Holy Shock on cooldown in order to get the maximum benefit and value from the forced set bonus, and this almost never suits Holy Paladin's playstyle, even for fights where we have to regularly move. On top of that, you have to give up a significant amount of haste rating as well as 2 gem sockets, or in plain language you actually lose raw HPS by slowing down your consistency for speeding up one Holy Light cast every 6 seconds or so at best. And speaking of tier set pieces, the best slots to fill these with are head and shoulders. These tier 10 items are also Holy Paladin's best pieces to obtain in the entire game. While technically horrific flesh epaulets from Festergut are slightly better, but this is mostly due to the additional gem socket they provide, which is negligible loss compared to the powerful healing cooldown the 2 pieces set bonus turns Divine Illumination into. The best offset pieces Holy Paladin uses are the plate chest from Rotface, the cloth pants from Festergut, and the plate gloves from Lady Deathwhisper. Plaguebringer stained pants are very close in EP score to any 264 item level pants with crit and haste, but due to the higher item level, they offer more intellect and haste rating that are Holy Paladin's best stats, as well as they offer mana regen through hit rating. Anyways, these pants are hard to obtain, so it might take a while to grab them. Meanwhile, stick with any 264 item level pants you can obtain. Some of these are drops from ICC 10 Heroic, some are crafts that you can buy with gold. In the latter case, leggings of Woven Death are by far the best to choose from. When it comes to rot resistant breastplate and Fallen Lord's handguards however, be sure to have a few duplicates of these items for swapping purposes whenever that opportunity opens up to loot them. Our best in slot cloak is Cloak of Burning Dusk from Halion. It's by far the most contested item we want and the BIS item for any caster. Regardless of what loot distribution system your guild uses, be sure to keep your resources for it. This is because we don't really have a less contested second option to use in the backslot. Holy Paladin's second best in slot that drops from Valithria Dreamwalker is also highly contested. For Holy Paladin's BI's Bracers we have two options to choose from, Braces of Fiery Knight and Phase Shifter's Bracers. Both are dropped from Halion and the difference in stats is negligible, so grab whichever you have an opportunity to put your hands on first. Phase Shifter's Bracers are also less contested due to the fact they are leather type of armor and therefore cannot be worn by mages, priests and warlocks. These also contain a yellow socket, and since Holy Paladin gems King's Amber, we can gain these 5 points of spell power from the socket bonus. Any of Halion's Bracers, however, are still hard to obtain, so you may see yourself sticking for a while with the Holy Paladin's third BIS option, Crypt Keeper's Braces from BPC, and these are plate. The normal version of this item is also BOE, that you can buy from Auction House, so generally speaking, we have a pretty decent choice of items to use in that slot. For boots, we have 4 Shadow Steps from Halion. Similarly to chest and gloves, be sure to grab a few of these every time you have an opportunity to do so, as these are good to have for min-maxing with gems. For waist, our best in slot is Split Shape Belt. This belt is contested only by shamans. Unfortunately, for some reason Blizzard decided to make this item an unique type, meaning we cannot have a copy of this belt, which otherwise would be a good piece for swapping purposes, considering the 3 gems we can equip Split Shape Belt with. As a fresh and new paladin, you may consider buying Belt of the Lonely Noble and wearing it for a while, and since its play type of armor, typically goes for very cheap on the market. Moving on to Holy Paladin's BI's necklace, we have Blood Queen's Crimson Choker dropped by Blood Queen Lana'thel. This is our second most contested item to obtain, but it doesn't sound so bad because the normal version of this necklace is also a BOE that you can buy from with gold and obtain it as a reward from the quest inside ICC if you're lucky enough, since Blood Queen's Crimson Choker doesn't run for very cheap on the market. Moving on to the next items, our BI's pair of rings is Ring of Rapid Ascent and Ring of Phase Regeneration. They are drops from Gunship Battle and Halion respectively. The second option to replace Ring of Phase Regeneration with is Ashen Band of Endless Wisdom, which is a reward for reaching Exalted with the Ashen Verdict reputation that you can farm only inside ICC by killing trash mobs and bosses. So most likely you will run the Ashen Ring for a while before you put hands on Halion's one. Rapid Ascent is more contested since it offers crit and haste as secondary stats, where Halion's ring contains MP5 and therefore contested only by healers. However, if you're a fresh 80 level paladin who is not into raiding yet, the best combo of rings you can use is the 264 item level version of Marrowgar's Frigid Eye, which is a BOE, paired with Ashen Band of Wisdom, which requires just friendly status with the Ashen Verdict, and this is easy to achieve with a few rep farm runs, killing the initial trash before Lord Marrowgar. Obtaining a good shield might be a problem since there are not many in the game with the right stats. Our best in slot is Bulwark with Smoldering Steel dropped by Lord Marrowgar, and fortunately he is the first boss in ICC, so even if you're an inexperienced player it won't be that hard to find the pug and farm that shield even on normal difficulty. This item is contested only by shamans. For trinkets, Holy Paladin has several options that you will swap according to the fight and your needs for additional longevity or healing throughput. Starting with the best healing throughput trinket in the game, Glowing Twilight Scale. The trinket is dropped from Halion and contested by all healers. GTS is extremely powerful for Holy Paladin because of the fact that you can further empower the effect by wings and divine illumination. This combination basically turns the trinket's effect into a horsepower and reliable source of AoE healing that becomes as additional aid to otherwise Holy Paladin's very limited AoE capability. And since Glyph of Holy Light is considered a direct heal, this increases the effective range of spreading the heal from 10 to 18 yards from initial target, making you easy to proc GTS on the entire raid with just few casts of Holy Light, even in scenarios when the raid is completely spread out. GTS perfectly suits encounters where the raid suffers from constant or regular raid-wide AoE damage. Such ones are Marrowgar's Bone Storm, Plaguework Swing, Pot Queen Lana'thel, Sindragosa, Lich King's Transition and Chamber phases, and Halion inside Twilight Realm. On these fights, you would get the most from GTS if used right. Moving on to the next trinket, we have Meteorite Crystal, dropped by Algalon 10-man in Ulduar. This trinket is theoretically no contested and Holy Paladin is the winner by default. Meteorite Crystal is by far Holy Paladin's number 1 mana regen trinket, providing a solid amount of intellect and MP5 through activation. As long as Beacon of Light is up on a target, you will gain 2 stacks per spellcast upon use, which significantly reduces the time required to reach the maximum stacks of 20. It's important to point out that despite the trinket's tooltip, the MP5 gain per stack is 75 and not 60. It's just that Blizzard have never fixed that when they have increased the MP5 value of trinkets by up to 25% in patch 3.2. Meteorite Crystal is a trinket you will want to wear at all times. This is why it's considered as our number 1 BS trinket in all situations. The only rules to observe for the duration once you activate the trinket are to not stop casting, as well as only to cast your healing spells. This means that playing around this trinket primarily means to avoid using Judgment, recasting Beacon, Summon or Sacred Shield during its duration, so plan ahead the remaining duration of these buffs not to lose them. It's however not the end of the world if you do, but this is a minor aspect to min-max when playing the class. Meteorite Crystal effect seems to average at about 175 MP5, but this is only half of the equation. The massive 111 Intellect equals 2010 mana after Divine Intellect Talent and Kings. On a 5-minute fight, this mana is worth 33.5 MP5. This means the shorter the fight is, the bigger the gain will be, and vice versa. In addition, we gain 20.1 MP5 from replenishment. This results in total of approximately 230 MP5, not even taking into consideration the additional MP5 you would get from using Divine Plea, Seal of Wisdom, Mana Tide from Resto Shaman, Revitalize from Resto Druid, or Hymn of Hope from Priest. Holy Paladin's second best mana regen trinket is Soul Preserver. This is an easy trinket to farm, considering that it's a drop from Cooling of Stratholme dungeon on normal mode, and therefore you can farm it all day long until it drops. I've already explained how the trinket basically works earlier in the video. What I would add on top of this is that Soul Preserver basically favors fights where the raid is more stacked or in proximity range, so you can always hit 5 targets with Glyph of Holy Light, and therefore maximizing the chance to proc the effect. This means that Soul Preserver is more valuable in 25-man raids and less in 10-man raids. The proc averages at about 250 MP5, which doesn't put it too far behind Meteorite Crystal. For the last trinket on the list, we can consider as a decent option Solace. Dropped by Lord Jaraxxus in TRGC, this trinket seems to be as a compromise variant taking the best of both worlds, healing throughput and longevity. It perfectly suits 10-man raids and in general encounters where you cannot get a good use of Soul Preserver trinket. Solace is also contested by healers, and usually the first prio always goes to the Resto Shaman. Remember, Holy Paladin's strength and at the same time weakness is his mana longevity. For encounters where you cannot get a good use from GTS, you always want to use 2 solid mana regen trinkets. Even in shortest fights, your mana pools cannot survive the chain casting of Holy Light, not without an external help from Divine Plea or Seal of Wisdom. Ensuring more static and effective mana pools to work with will contribute to less need of using Divine Plea and even less need of SOWing your target, or you will effectively gain more healing through MP5. Holy Paladin's absolute best in slot weapon is Vala'nir. A constant stream of Holy Lights and therefore Beacon of Light allow you to feed your tanks and the raid with strong shields for the additional damage mitigation, especially when combined with healing cooldowns, where Glyph of Holy Light allows for spreading more shields on the raid. Because of this, the given EP value of 350 for the proc you can see on the table can be considered as a bare minimum in majority of the fights, as Vala'nir really contributes a lot to your healing. Vala'nir is a weapon that once equipped there is no turning back and it stays hard locked into your weapon slot. An exception from this rule is Valithria Dreamwalker Encounter, where the weapon has no value. Vala'nir has a 45-second internal cooldown with a 10% chance of proccing. The proc itself is called Blessing of Ancient Kings and has a duration of 15 seconds. Blessing of Ancient Kings allows you to place a stackable shield on a target called Protection of the Ancient Kings for 15% of the amount healed. The shield has a cap of 20,000. The mace cannot proc from full overheal, but once the effect triggers, the overheal is counted towards the shield. If 2 or more Vala'nirs proc simultaneously, they all contribute to 1 shield on a target with again an upper limit of 20,000. Although the ICC buff increases the absorption effects, this does not include absorption caused by items. In this regard, Protection of the Ancient Kings does not double dip with ICC buff. The shields, however, will still become stronger because you will heal for 30% more. In addition, GTS cannot proc Vala'nir, nor does it contribute to the mace's effect. Since the legendary mace is a reward from completing quests that takes a long journey of collecting 30 fragments, Holy Paladin's second best in slot weapon is either Blood Surge or Royal Scepter, both dropped by Lich King. These weapons have a similar stats and they differ only by the type, sword and mace respectively. There is only one Libram that's even remotely worth considering, and it's Libram of Renewal. This Libram is so powerful it is effectively BS for the whole expansion. With an average of 35 Holy Light casts per minute, the Libram is worth 315 MP5 if we consider also Glyph of Seal of Wisdom, and the value will go up the more casts you do. Due to how powerful the mana regen on this Libram is, it's almost never worth swapping the 2 Libram Veracity, except for some very rare scenarios you can gain additional throughput, as long as this doesn't lead in burning your mana down before the end of the fight. For Valithria Dreamwalker, however, Libram Veracity is an absolute best in slot to use. Next are Enchants. For Helmet Enchant you want 30 spell power and 20 crit rating, which requires to be revered with Kirin Tor in order to purchase it. For Shoulders you have 24 spell power and 15 crit rating, and this enchant requires Exalted with Sons of Hodir. For Cloak, 23 haste rating. For Chest you have 2 options, plus 10 all stats or 250 mana enchants. 10 Intellect is worth 180 mana after Divine Intellect and Kings, so the difference is 70 mana in favor of Exceptional Mana Enchant, where powerful stats enchant offers 2-ish spell power for Holy Guidance talent and 3-ish crit rating if we convert Intellect to crit. In terms of mana gain, Exceptional Mana Enchant is slightly better and this enchant provides 4 more MP5 on average. The trade-offs are so negligible for both options, so the choice here is yours, as I consider neither of these to be clear winner here. For gloves, you want Hyperspeed Accelerators enchant from Engineering. For belt, you want an Eternal Belt Buckle that will attach one additional prismatic socket into your belt. Keep in mind that this is not considered as a true enchant, so you can still use Frag Belt enchant from Engineering as well. For pants, you want either Sapphire, Spell Thread or Brilliant Spell Thread. The difference here is 20 Spirit versus 30 Stamina. The mana gain from Spirit is also very situational and the amount is very low to make any difference in combat. Where 30 Stamina increases slightly your health, that will add to your survivability. The choice here is again yours, which enchant would suit you better. For boots, you want Nitro Boots. For shield, 25 Intellect. Lastly, for main hand and bracers, you have the choice to enchant these with spell power or intellect. The difference between both options is 825 mana and about 15 crit rating after intellect to crit conversion versus 82 spell power. The choice is between healing, throughput and longevity, and while spell power enchants overall have a better value, intellect enchants also allow you to effectively convert that intellect to haste rating through gems while sustaining the same amount of static mana pool. Moving on to meta gems. They match meta sockets which can be found only in helmets. These gems have special requirements that must be met for the meta gems bonus to activate. It should be noted that gems that match multiple socket colors can fulfill meta gem requirements for each and any color they match. For example, if a meta gem requires 2 red gems to activate, you can do so by using 2 orange or purple gems. The best meta gem for Holy Paladin is the Insightful Earthsiege Diamond. It gives 21 intellect and a chance to restore 600 mana on spellcast. The mana gain has a 15 seconds internal cooldown with a 5% chance to proc. Insightful Earthsiege Diamond can be triggered by literally anything. Healing and damaging spells, crafting, mounting and even switching your specialization. The meta gem scales with your haste. The faster you cast, the more global cooldowns you spend, the more procs will occur. To calculate the average MP5 the meta gem would provide, first you have to find the average effective internal cooldown of the proc. To do so, you have to divide your casting speed or GCD by 5% and then add the result into the default 15-second internal cooldown of the meta gem. On the right side of your screen, I've given a table with the average MP5 gained from the Insightful Earthsiege Diamond for casting speeds for 1 to 2 seconds in an interval of 0.1 second. Unlike other classes, Holy Paladin has no stat caps to worry about and primarily the class favors yellow gems, with a couple of other gems to hit meta gem requirements. In the case of Insightful Earthsiege Diamond, you need additionally 1 red and 1 blue gem in order to activate it. This is where Nightmare Tier helps, as a prismatic type of gem counts as any color and therefore it's enough to fulfill the Insightful Earthsiege Diamond requirement. However, it's still highly advised to use 1 orange and 1 green gem or just single purple gem combined with the yellow gem, as it's more stat value rather than the prismatic one, since you can truly benefit only from 10 intellect Nightmare Tier offers. Despite Holy Paladins being a fairly constrained healer, both intellect and haste gems are really powerful, just on opposite ends. On average, gemming for intellect is safer, while gemming for haste is a good strategy for Holy Paladins in guilds with extremely fast skill times. In this line of thoughts, the gems I've given in the BS list I consider to be the best in terms of average rate-wise scenario following the standard environment factors. This means gems are of a great subject to change on per boss basis. In fights that offer huge gaps of downtime and therefore you can regularly SOW and Divine Plea with almost no healing penalty from these actions, you can consider going with more haste gems to increase your overall healing throughput. Where in fights you have a constant damage going on the tanks or the raid, and especially in such fights that don't suit very well staying in the melee range of the boss, a full intellect build might work the best. Learn to make proper estimates and decisions from your gearing choices based on your experience and knowledge about the boss mechanics. This is the key for true min-maxing. There are a variety of good and powerful consumables that can further help to enhance a Holy Paladin's throughput and longevity in the game. Starting with the best combination of elixirs for Holy Paladin, you have Elixir of Mighty Thoughts, which is a Guardian Elixir, and Elixir of Lightning Speed, which is a Battle Elixir. This provides you with a 45 intellect and haste rating respectively. Keep in mind that you can have only 1 battle and 1 Guardian Elixir active at a time, and these do not stack with flasks. The drawback is that elixirs expire upon death, where flasks do not. You should, however, always consider to use elixir combo, as it's just a much better value than the flasks because the alternative option is Flask of Distilled Wisdom, which provides you with just 20 more intellect in comparison to Mighty Thoughts, while you give up 45 haste rating from lightning speed. In case of speed running, you have the option to use Swiftness of Zanza as a guardian elixir to replace Elixir of Mighty Thoughts with, and that one increases the player's run speed by 20%. As a Holy Paladin, you have no access to Pursuit of Justice talent because you don't run Retribution talents, nor you have access to Turska's Vitality enchant on boots because of Nitro boosts. Therefore, your natural run speed will be quite low and this would leave you behind the run curve of other classes. For most players, however, it will not be very relevant to bother with because Swiftness of Zanza is not for sale, but instead you can get this elixir with tokens which you can obtain only from specific activities like quests once you hit Revered Reputation with the Zandala tribe, but it's still a good option to remember. For food, you'd want any that provides 40 haste rating, such as Imperial Manta Steak. For potions, you'll primarily use Runic Mana Injectors that provides you with 5375 mana on average, or Runic Mana Potions that give 4300 mana on average if for some reason engineering is not one of your chosen professions. While in a combat lockout you can use only one potion and the 1 minute cooldown of the potions will trigger when you leave the combat. That being said, pre-potting mechanic can be used as a method immediately before the engage of the boss. While this is a common practice for DPS classes, healers in general are not predisposed to do so unless for parsing purposes, and even then, typically no boss really hurts with a massive damage on the raid within the first seconds of the engage to actually make the pre-pot of such potion really valuable. An exception here is Valithria Dreamwalker encounter where you want to use Potion of Speed or Wild Magic Potion. While Potion of Speed is overall the better option here, be sure to inform your Discord priest about that, in case he is assigned to feed you with Power Infusion on the start, as you don't want to stack both effects simultaneously. You can also consider using Flask of the Frost Worm as the best value flask for Valithria Dreamwalker encounter, but only if you're truly going to parse. Otherwise, using a flask for just a few minutes is not really an efficient way to waste your consumables. Lastly, be sure to have some Dark Runes in your bags. Despite their long cooldown and relatively low mana they provide, it's still a free mana gain that mostly goes for very cheap on the market. When it comes to user interface, a healer's UI is crucial when it comes to quickly adapting to a raid environment. I would advise you to spend hours and even days playing around and thinking carefully about the structure of your UI. A compact and manageable interface is a must for any self-respecting healer. It is important that you have a focally centered UI. I recommend placing a raid frame in the bottom center of your screen and arranging all of your important spells and cooldowns around it, sorted by category, so you can easily see what you have available at any given time. This way, you will have a central focus point for your eyes to rest on, while having also a larger unobstructed viewing area to keep the entire screen clear in your peripheral vision during an encounter. This way, you would have significantly less chance to miss something that would otherwise wipe you or the raid. Add-ons are all a preference to each individual player. This is why I'll take time to mention only a few add-ons that I consider to be the most important ones. In the first place, you need a raid frame. There are many raid frames add-ons that you can use, and the choice here is a matter of personal taste. I personally recommend Grid Tool. This add-on has a variety of settings and features to help you organize your raid frame. Track everything that matters on your raid frame, keeping it as clean and organized as possible. This will help you to more easily deal with boss mechanics, as well as better estimating your healing decisions. The second add-on that I consider as a must-have is Weak Auras. Generally speaking, this add-on allows you to create different auras for the tracking of boss, raid and self cooldowns. The variety of possibilities using Weak Auras is huge. And lastly, if you don't have any weak auras to track boss cooldowns, you can consider using DBM or Bigwigs add-on. This will give you all the information for the boss abilities and their retirements, which has a huge importance to your raiding experience. Along with your user interface, keybinds can greatly improve your reaction time and decrease wasted time when utilizing your abilities. Keybinds also allow you to subconsciously react to situations with muscle memory, if you have formatted your binds well. It is a must that you have binded all important and even less important abilities. When organizing your keybinds, keep in mind to consider the importance and frequency in which your abilities are used. In this instance, bind your most important and frequently used spells to buttons that you can reach easily and quickly and are less likely to misclick. Moving on to actual healing strategy. In this chapter, I'm going to make a simple analysis of what you're supposed to do as Holy Paladin on each boss in Icecrown Citadel, minus Gunship Battle, as it is, I believe, a very trivial and easy fight to consider, and then I will end with Halion encounter in Ruby Sanctum. Starting with the very first boss in Icecrown Citadel, we have Lord Marrowgar. As a pre-pull setup, you'd want to start about 10 seconds before the boss engage by casting a random Holy Light to proc Light's Grace buff. Use Beacon and Sacred Shield on the off tank, while still have enough seconds left to return mana lost via Mana Radiant Food before the pull. Generally speaking, this is what you'd be using as a pre-pull setup for majority of the bosses, minus Valithria Dreamwalker. Since the entire raid will be positioned under the boss, the main tank is usually starting the fight with a minor defensive cooldown. On pull, you apply Judgment on the boss to proc Judgments of the Pure while moving under it. When you position yourself, you start healing the main tank or the raid members that receive damage from Cold Flame due to bad positioning. This positioning is so far the most efficient, since your Glyph of Holy Light will benefit the most due to close range of all raid members, and you're able to utilize Seal of Wisdom when you see it fits. If the entire raid is positioned correctly, no one should receive damage from Cold Flame, and the only damage that should be present before Bone Storm is the damage from Bone Slice and melee attacks on tanks, as well as damage from Bone Spikes. Specific moment in Holy Paladin gameplay on Lord Marrowgar encounter is Bone Storm. Due to the nature of this mechanic, in progression stage of the gearing process, or if you do 0% buff, you should run away from the boss so you receive minimal damage and position yourself so you could heal the scattered raid members. However, in endgame stage, and specifically with 30% buff, where you're already BIS or near BIS geared, you should not move at all from the starting position. Don't forget to use your Righteous Fury if talented, as it is an additional 6% DR. Right on the Bone Storm cast, you cast Beacon and Sacred Shield on yourself, swap your Libram to Veracity if you think you'd have enough mana to end the fight with no need of using Divine Plea, and spread all your healing cooldowns left to cover the Bone Storm phase entirely. One way is to stack all your healing cooldowns on start, but it will just be too overpowered and you'd waste some of the extra healing in overheal. For this reason, I would advise you to combine Divine Illumination with GTS for the beginning, as it is another 35% boost for the trinket, and then use Wings with Gloves. In the end of the day, it depends on the situation and your estimate of how to properly combine your cooldowns for maximum effect. If the initial damage from Bone Storm and Cold Flame is severe, you can follow up with Divine Guardian and continue healing through Cold Flame damage and raid-wide damage from Bone Storm. Judging by personal experience and numerous raids led and done, players are very often lazy to move or simply do not want to lose their DPS uptime, and eventually this results in Marrowgar whirling in the starting position and releasing Cold Flame on top of the entire raid. Therefore, a huge healing outburst in this predicted scenario is quite in handy. Critical moment during Bone Storm with the usage of this tactic is the chance to be impaled. In order to counter this, you could follow a more safer route in the previously explained execution, and it is to use Divine Shield instead of Wings and continue healing the raid, since at that point the boss won't be able to target you with spikes due to the immunity. Once the Bone Storm is over, swap back to Libram of Renewal if needed, measure this by approximate ratio of your mana and boss health left, and position yourself once again under the boss until it's killed. Keep in mind that each swap of Librams takes a 1.5 second global cooldown while in combat. In the Lady Deathwhisper encounter, a certain amount of pressure is present on Holy Paladins, since tanks and the raid receive damage from different sources, and some of those are usually deadly. Before the pull, you apply Beacon and Sacred Shield on the main tank, and follow up with Judgment on the boss when the pull happens. Prioritized healing targets are main tank, the off tank, as well as the raid overall due to the Death and Decay mechanic. Critical moment in phase 1 is when the ads spawn. With the ad spawn, you should be positioned near the stairs that lead to Lady Deathwhisper so you can have maximum coverage. The usual play here is where the tanks move the ads to the middle so the raid can cleave or AoE them down. In this case, Fury Warriors tend to over-aggro and receive significant chunks of damage, therefore as Holy Paladin, you should use Divine Guardian when the ads merge to reduce the incoming damage, and you focus your healing on the tank or melee DPS who are affected by Necrotic Strike. In some specific scenarios, Hand of Sacrifice or Lay on Hands can also be considered here. During Mind Control mechanic, be ready to use your Hammer of Justice to the target closest to you in case druids are slacking with Cyclones. Most of the high endgame guilds use Bloodlust on pull in order to burn Lady Deathwhisper's mana barrier, so there is only one wave of ads in phase 1. This gives you the opportunity to safely use Divine Plea right after the first wave of the ads is dead, because there is no significant damage on the raid until the barrier is down, and also to refresh your Judgments of the Pure buff. When the barrier is down and phase 2 starts, refresh your beacon and reposition to the middle of the room where the totem should be. Critical moments in phase 2 are explosion of Vengeful Shades, Frostbolt Volley, and damage from Mind Control raid members which are not under any CC effect. Combination of all three effects, or even Vengeful Blast and Frostbolt Volley combined damage, can be lethal for the entire raid, so your healing priority should be on the targets affected by the mentioned source. Due to how damage works in this fight, healing increased cooldowns should not be used preemptively but reactively. The usual logic is to outheal the raid-wide damage caused by explosions as fast as possible and pay close attention to Frostbolt Volley timers. If the explosion happens 2 or 3 seconds before the Frostbolt Volley, that's a go signal for Divine Illumination, Wings and Divine Guardian if any of these cooldowns is up. Holy Paladin gameplay, apart from the mentioned specifics, relies on the timed Holy Light cast for each Lady Deathwhisper swing on the main tank. The common misconception about Lady Deathwhisper mechanics is that using Aura Mastery Shadow will reduce the damage from Vengeful Blast, however that is not true. Vengeful Blast is a combined Shadow Frost source of damage, and the only way to mitigate damage from it is to use Aura Mastery Frost and Shadow in the same time, or simply via raid-wide damage reduction spells like Divine Guardian. Using only one of the mentioned Aura Masteries is a waste of cooldown. However, using Frost Aura Mastery before the Frostbolt Volley will help mitigate the damage from the mechanic. Lastly, one tip in second phase is to position yourself close to the middle of the room when using Divine Guardian, as it has only 30 yards range. By staying close to any of the edges of the room, you won't be able to cover as many raid mates as possible. Healing Deathbringer Saurfang as a Holy Paladin involves managing the constant damage from Mark of the Fallen Champion and ensuring your healing is efficient and timed on tanks. You start a fight in melee range to maximize your Seal of Wisdom utilization. Few seconds before the pull, you should apply Beacon and Sacred Shield on the main tank, cast Holy Light to gain Light's Grace. You should precast Holy Light to cover the first hit on the last second of pull timer, and right after the cast, you follow up with Judgment to proc Judgments of the Pure. Healing is straightforward via constant stream of Holy Light, targeting the tanks mainly and the raid members affected by Boiling Blood. The usual way to deal with initial Boiling Blood is to use Hand of Protection on any caster affected by that debuff. This helps the raid significantly because it prevents Deathbringer Saurfang from gaining blood power from those raid members who are affected by the mentioned mechanic, as well as delays the first mark. Using Divine Plea is safe until the first mark is out. While the damage inflicted on tanks and the raid via Blood Nova is easily healable even with heal reduction from Divine Plea, try to use Divine Plea in between Blood Novas as the mechanic occurs every 20 seconds and there is enough gap to fit the full duration of Divine Plea. Once the first mark is out, you instantly apply your Beacon and Sacred Shield on the marked target and continue healing the tank that is currently tanking DBS. With an average or above average raid damage in endgame guilds and properly distributed damage on beasts, DBS should apply his first mark at around 45 to 55% of his HP, depending if he does 0 or 30% ICC buff, so that is the breaking point and indicator when to pay close attention to healing priority. When DBS reaches 30% HP, he goes Frenzy. You should precast your beacon slightly before that to ensure your beacon will not wear off of its target later when the damage taken is high enough for you to have that opportunity of spending an unnecessary global cooldown to do so. Plan and spread all of your healing cooldowns since the damage inflicted on raid will be frequent and higher. There is also no room for Divine Plea or Seal of Wisdom during this time. Critical moment in DBS fight for healers is when the marked raid members are affected by Boiling Blood also, and practically each Blood Nova casted while DBS is on Frenzy. Your healing priority should still be on tanks and marked targets, however you will have to coordinate with Protection Paladin which Blood Nova should be covered by you via Divine Guardian to avoid high raid damage. In case one of your party mates is affected by mark, you can leave Divine Sacrifice up as well. Use Divine Shield if possible when the mark is on you. This is one less target to heal for 12 seconds. Rotface. As a pre-pull preparation, 10 seconds before the pull you should cast Beacon and Sacred Shield on the main tank and proc Light's Grace buff by casting Holy Light. On pull, cast Judgment on the boss to proc Judgments of the Pure buff and run to the melee range of the boss, as this is the optimal position for Holy Paladin and this way you ensure Seal of Wisdom utilization. Competent raid leaders will always allow healers to stand in melee range on both Rotface and Festergut simply because this way they can completely avoid the Wild Gas mechanic being cast on them, which ensures constant uptime on healing on the entire raid. When you're positioned, your healing priority on Rotface are raid members affected by mutated infection, a debuff which reduces their healing received by 75%, so you keep streaming your Holy Light on the target until the debuff expires or gets dispelled. Once the debuff is dispelled or simply expires, a small ooze will appear and attach to the same player with a weak radiating ooze debuff, which deals moderate nature damage to everyone within 10 yards of that player. Your healing priority now extends to raid members who are affected by this AoE damage. Apart from infected players, your healing focus should be on the raid members who are affected by Slime Spray and Wild Gas. Slime Spray occurs every 25 seconds as Rotface is fixated into one direction and deals nature damage every second for 5 seconds in the frontal cone. There are always players who do not move from the Slime Spray covered area, in particular ranges because it's a DPS loss for them. So you'll have to pay close attention to this mechanic in order to top those players up. Critical moments for Holy Paladin's healing priority in this fight are the situations where the mechanics are overlapping, so the raid takes significantly more damage. This usually involves the following situations: Ooze Flood being casted and the raid member gets Wild Gas in the same time. Mutated infection being applied on the raid member and in the same time he is affected by Wild Gas. And lastly, raid members being sprayed while being Wild Gassed and standing in slime. On top of that, as you strive deeper into the fight, more small oozes will appear and more irradiated damage will be present in the raid. The off-tank will receive more damage due to unstable ooze debuff on big ooze, so it becomes more healing intense. Since the main tank, off-tank and raid members are not receiving huge damage until multiple oozes are present in the fight, it is highly recommended not to use any healing increasing cooldowns, but keep it for the above mentioned scenarios. It is not a pattern, but a situation-based decision-making process when to use your cooldowns with a simple goal: to keep the raid members alive in the critical parts of the fight. In this case, you want to combine gloves in Divine Illumination with GTS when the situation is as described, or gloves with wings with GTS if Illumination is on cooldown. As it is highly unlikely in the endgame guilds, however very likely in progressing scenarios, unstable ooze explosion could occur if a big ooze goes over 5 stacks. When unstable ooze explosion is casted, ooze will be flung at every player in the raid, dealing AoE damage if they hit. These have a short delay before hitting the ground, necessitating the entire raid shift at least 6 yards without moving to a spot where someone else was already standing. This could be an additional critical moment for the entire raid because this mechanic can one-shot any raid member hit by the flanked uses, and if the explosion happens in the same time when wild gas mechanic, it can be even worse. In this situation, it is highly advised to use your Divine Shield in order to completely negate the damage from this scenario. Moving on to the second boss of Plea Quarter, Festergut. As stated in the explanation for Rotface, the pre-pull preparation and positioning for this boss will be equal. However, the healing priority in this fight is slightly different as the tank receives the most amount of damage due to gastric bloat application every 12 seconds and Inhaled Blight mechanic, which buffs Festergut's damage furthermore as the fight lasts longer. In this encounter, we can safely use the Inhaled Blight cast time to refresh our Judgments of the Pure buff, Beacon or Sacred Shield, as well as few melee swings for Seal of Wisdom, since there will be no damage on the tank until the cast is over and the melee swing timer of the boss resetted. Few seconds after the pull, Professor Putricide will release Gaseous Blight in the room, which becomes a constant raid-wide damage aura, so your healing priority is extended to the entire raid. Every 30 seconds, 3 gas spores will attach to random raid members, which explode after 12 seconds, applying a debuff called Blighted Spores that deals resistible shadow damage every second for 6 seconds to everyone around the spore affected target in 8 yards. Additionally, targets will also be debuffed with Inoculated debuff, reducing their shadow damage taken by 25%, stacking up to 3 times. Specific moment which requires attention is when the first spore explodes. At that point, no raid member will have Inoculated debuff, so they will all receive a significant chunk of shadow damage, which needs to be healed as soon as possible. Around 2 seconds before the explosion of those spores, you should use gloves in GTS and heal the raid until everyone is topped off. After you heal through this mechanic on start, the healing on the raid becomes easier as each spores wave gives an additional stack of Inoculated. However, wild gas mechanic is still present and you need to pay close attention to raid members affected by it. After reaching 3rd stack, if BIS or near BIS geared, the main tank should start rotating defensive cooldowns as well as ask for externals if needed to avoid distressing the healers, since the damage received from Festergut becomes quite significant. Shortly after 2 minutes into the fight, Festergut will exhale the gas using Pungent Blight, dealing heavy irresistible raid-wide damage and restarting the gaseous blight cycle that is explained at the start. In the most case scenarios, the main tank is Blood Decay, so he is able to negate every 3rd stack of gastric bloat. However, even in the endgame guilds, Pungent Blight hits the raid when tank receives 6th or 7th stack of gastric, which is a green light for us to use our healing cooldowns. At this moment of fight, the tank receives huge chunks of damage even with defensive cooldown up, so you should use your Divine Illumination 20 or 30 seconds before the Pungent hits. Around 2 or 3 seconds till the end of Pungent cast, you should use Divine Guardian to mitigate the damage from the mechanic and instantly follow up with Gloves, Wings and GTS and start pouring Holy Lights into the raid. Reason why we combine cooldowns like this is simply because the tank receives high damage at this stage of the fight and you also want to preserve enough mana using Divine Illumination, so we're able to burst heal the raid after Pungent due to the reason that after Pungent explosion the entire raid is cleansed from Inoculated debuff and there is a follow-up wild gas right after Pungent which drastically increases damage taken. Another mechanic in Festergut encounter which is worth mentioning is Malleable Goo. Every 10 seconds Putricide will throw a vial of Malleable at a random player. This is represented with a green circle on the ground which will explode after 5 seconds, dealing heavy nature damage to everyone around 5 yards, as well as slowing their attack and cast speed by 20% for 20 seconds. To deal with this mechanic, everyone needs to be spread at all times to avoid being hit, as well as making it easier to see the point of impact. Many players will instead want to shuffle between Festergut's feet when it happens, as it will be almost impossible to see it under a stack of players. Our healing management in terms of this mechanic is always reactive. In case any of the raid members get hit by it, heal them up and return to a healing priority. Common misconception on Festergut is that using Shadowrun Mastery mitigates the damage from Pungent Blight. That is not true because Pungent Blight is not resistible. The only way to mitigate damage is by acquiring stacks of Inoculated, using major defensive cooldowns or via raid-wide defensive cooldown like Divine Guardian. Shadowrun Mastery can be used after Pungent, the moment when Wild Gas hits the raid, so the damage from the spread effect of Wild Gas is mitigated on affected players who are in the 8 yards of the affected player. That part of the Wild Gas mechanic is resistible. Professor Putricide encounter combines and slightly extends the healing strategy from Festergut and Rotface, making it a suitable fight for Holy Paladin because it requires combined single target and AoE healing due to different sources of damage. I will not cover the tactical aspects of PP fight, as nowadays even the endgame guilds are using different tactics to fight this boss, but my focus will purely be on Holy Paladin role in this encounter. Before pull, you want to do the usual preparation explained in the previous boss encounters. On pull, go to the melee range of the boss and cast Judgment while moving to proc Judgments on the pure buff. The primary source of damage before transition is from the slime puddles and melee attacks from the boss, so your healing priority are the affected raid members and the Abomination. When transition is casted, you should position at the table, use the free global cooldown to apply the beacon on the red ooze targeted raid member and heal the raid. When oozes start going after the linked raid members, use gloves and combine Divine Illumination with GTS and heal the raid. At this point, you should reposition, avoiding the knockup by the green ooze so your healing is not interrupted, and use Divine Guardian when the green is about to connect on the target and explode. Unlucky scenario would be if you're linked with one of the oozes, then it's all about survival. The healing priority in the transition is on the players who received most of the damage mainly from ooze eruption, and those are the melee raid members in most of the cases. When the oozes are dead, swap back your beacon on the main tank and reposition near the boss to utilize Seal of Wisdom. Pay close attention to choking gas in this case. The ooze variables between transitions are handled the same way as on transitions, via constant stream of Holy Light in the raid and keeping the tank, A-bomb and red ooze targeted raid member alive. When the second transition starts, find your way to the table and use your gloves and wings. Healing strategy here is the same like on first transition, however depending on the raid efficiency, GTS might be ready for the second transition. If it is, combine it with wings, if not, save it for the start of phase 3 when the tanks are swapping due to mutated plague damage. Using Divine Plea in this encounter is questionable due to the frequency of combined damage sources on the raid, however after the oozes die on transition, there is a small gap until PP engages the tank again, so this is your window when to use it, at least with a cancel or a macro for 2 or 3 ticks, however this is purely situational and depends on multiple factors and mainly on the quality of the raid. Holy Paladin gameplay in the Blood Prince Council encounter directly evolves around raid awareness and positioning as well as healing priority in each phase depending on which boss is active during the encounter due to empowered abilities. Due to the delayed start of the encounter, it is safe to move towards the boss in the first few seconds before the boss is engaged, so use this time to properly position yourself in the middle of the raid formation used for this encounter. It is optimal to be in the middle of the room near stairs, so the entire raid is covered by your healing and defensive abilities upon usage. Experienced and competent raid leaders will always position their raid members according to the healer's position, respecting the minimal defined range of 12 yards between raid members, which is enough to prevent unnecessary knockback on the healers during Empower Shock Vortex. Few seconds before the boss is engaged, apply your beacon and Sacred Shield on the main tank, the one that is tanky Valnar and Taldaram, and precast Holy Light to proc Grace. Your healing priority at start of the fight is the tank assigned on Keleseth and raid members affected by glittering sparks applied by Taldaram. It is not recommended to use Judgment Right on pull since it leads you into global cooldown, while in the same time 2 bosses are hitting the main tank. That situation can be dangerous, so to avoid endangering your tank due to your delayed uptime, it is highly advised to wait for the Empower Shock Vortex cast from Valnar and then apply Judgment to proc Judgments to the Pure. Most of the endgame guilds on Icecrown use Bloodlust at the start of this encounter, so your Judgments to the Pure buff downtime will not be of crucial impact on pull. Another way to deal with this is to use a Digrat or Piñata to proc Judgments to the Pure before the pull, however that would not be necessary in regular raids. In coordination with Protection Paladin, each Empowered Shocked Vortex should be covered by Divine Guardian, so make sure to communicate when Dvalnar is empowered. The usual practice is that Holy Paladin covers the first Vortex and Protection Paladin covers the second one if it happens. When Empowered Shock Vortex hits the raid, the healing priority is on the raid members who suffer the most damage from this mechanic, and during the cast time of the mentioned mechanic, you should use your GTS right after your Divine Guardian, as it helps to heal the raid members who failed to position properly on the Vortex, and those are usually the melee DPS. Healing priority while Valnar is always active is on the affected tank and side damage from Vortex. No healing increasing cooldown should be used in this phase. A critical moment in Holy Paladin gameplay in this encounter is the swap, which makes one of the 2 remaining bosses active, providing them with the empowered abilities. Both scenarios require different healing strategy. If Taldaram gets empowered, every 25 seconds Taldaram will cast glittering sparks in a cone at a random player. This will deal a small amount of fire damage followed by damage over time and slow for 8 seconds. This can and should be dispelled immediately, typically with a mass dispel. In this case, your healing priority should be on the raid members affected by sparks. Do not dispel the raid members as you're losing a global for each dispel. Let the priest do it. Another moment in phase when Taldaram is active is when he summons a ball of Inferno Flame that is chasing a random player. As it travels, it will deal damage to players nearby every 0.3 seconds. Each tick of this damage will reduce the damage dealt on impact, so it requires targeted player to move through the raid members in order to reduce the charges of the ball. If the targeted raid member fails to react to this mechanic, no healing will be able to heal the massive damage the flame does, and it will eventually lead to many deaths or a raid web. However, if the ball of Inferno hits the raid and targeted raid member while he is kiting it through the raid, it will still deal some damage, and those players affected by it should be topped up with Holy Light as soon as possible. Another scenario is when Keleseth becomes active. This phase is critical and Holy Paladin healing priority is directly focused on healing the tank, which is on Keleseth due to the massive chunks of damage inflicted by Empower Shadowlands. The usual play here is that the Kelesset tank is focused on collecting Dark Nucleus during the fight to stack up on Shadow Resonance in order to reduce the damage taken when Kelesset is active. However, the moment Kelesset becomes active, the usual scenario is that the melee DPS cleave down the remaining Nucleus that is attached to the tank, so tank is required to use defensive cooldowns to stay alive, and this is the moment when we should use our healing cooldowns. The moment Kelesset becomes empowered, you should use Gloves, Divine Illumination with Wings, and pour Holy Lights into the tank. Each hit of Empowered Shadow Lance should be covered with one Holy Light to top of the tank, and there is no room for movement or free globals because each hit can be deadly if the tank already does not have a DR effect on himself or a handsack. It is RNG which boss will be active after Valnar, so make sure to use your cooldowns wisely. The explained way of cooldowns usage is the optimal and safest one and fulfills your duty as Holy Paladin in this fight. Pre-pull preparation for Blood Queen Lana'thel is the same as for any other active boss. You start with Holy Light and Beacon as well as Sacred Shield on the tank that's taking the link, not the tank which takes the boss. Reason for that is due to the combined damage of Delirious Slash and Mirror damage from the main tank throughout the entire fight, where the off-tank will require more healing. The usual strategy most of the endgame guilds use is where the Blood Queen is tanked down the stairs of her platform and the entire raid is stacked as a single entity in the melee range. The stacking tactic is also the most dangerous one due to the combined damage inflicted by Twilight Bloodbolt and Shroud of Sorrow. However, it is also a perfect one for healers as it allows full capacity usage of Glyph of Holy Light and Chain Heal from Resto Shaman. Since the raid is stacked and damage received from Pact of the Dark Fallen is minimal as the link players are connected instantly, in the progression stage it is highly advised to use the spread tactic and pre-assign a conjunction spot for the linked players so the damage on the rest of the raid is minimal. On pull, proc your Judgments of the Pure and position yourself in the melee range. Your healing priority in this fight is the entire raid with emphasis on the main tank. When it comes to the utilization of healing cooldowns, you do not want to use anything on start of the fight, as the damage inflicted overall is not significant and easily manageable. As the fight usually lasts around 3 minutes more or less, our healing cooldowns management in this encounter is slightly adjusted and in this case we follow Twilight Bloodbolt timer and our Valanir proc to pull the maximum out of our healing throughput when we use our cooldowns. As our Valanir will proc few seconds after the pull as expected, start healing the entire raid to spread the shield as much as possible. Every 15 seconds Lana'thel will cast Twilight Bloodbolt at a random non-tank raid member. This deals heavy shadow damage to the target and everyone within 6 yards of them, so our play will be adapted according to this scenario. Our next Valanir proc should be timed around 3rd or 4th Twilight Bloodbolt, so this is the moment when to use our GTS and Divine Illumination, and when GTS is off cooldown following the same situation, we use Wings and GTS on the next available Valanir proc, and so on, our healing cooldowns are available once again. With each combination, try to pour a constant stream of Holy Lights into the raid. Critical moment can be Fly Phase, as it starts with Fear. In case you're not dispelled fast enough and for some reason you end up near flames, do not hesitate to use Divine Shield. It's better to be safe than sorry. During the flight, you should use that time to refill Judgments in the Pure and spread from the rest of the raid members to reduce the damage from Bloodbolt Whirl, however close to the middle so your Divine Guardian covers the entire raid that is spread in the room. After the flight phase, the raid members should restack in the same position as they were in the beginning. If your Valanir nearly lines up with this moment, you should wait out the proc and then use the healing cooldowns. As you are positioned in the melee range, you can easily utilize Seal of Wisdom. If possible, try to avoid using Divine Plea after the flight phase due to significantly increased damage on the raid, hence there is no space for healing downtime. Instead, try to properly utilize external mana cooldowns and combine your Dark Rune, Mana Injector and Arcane Torrent when you need it the most. Valithria Dreamwalker. First, let's talk about how to properly prepare yourself for this encounter. First and foremost, realize that haste and specially spell power are top stats for this fight. You'll have infinite mana from the stacking Twisted Nightmares buff, which means that your intellect and MP5 are pretty much useless here. You need Twisted Nightmares to inflate your healing amounts to make this fight possible, and so spell power scales the best with the healing boost, but haste allows you to throw that huge amount of healing faster. That being said, building the most optimal gear setup for this fight depends on few factors. First, how many portals healers plan to enter. This is directly related to the number of healers used for this fight. Second, is Bloodlust being used for final massive healing phase, or Bloodlust is not being considered to be used for Valithria Dreamwalker encounter at all? And third, do you have Disco Priest buffing you additionally with power infusions or not, as well as do you have a Holy Priest buffing the boss with Guardian Spirits? These questions are very important because the more Twisted Nightmare stacks you have, and the overall more healing multipliers you can benefit from, the better spell power scaling becomes over haste rating scaling for your overall HPS. Top parsers solo or 2-heal Valithria by entering as many portals as possible when getting also all the benefits from Disco and Holy Priests across the fight. As I've already mentioned, this includes power infusions and Guardian Spirits on the boss. Bloodlust will also be popped for the final push. That being said, your Holy Light will be mostly at or close to the global cooldown cap for the majority of the fight, making haste rating completely useless to gem. In this instance, a full spell power build is the best to go with. For normal circumstance, however, Valithria Dreamwalker is healed by entering 1 or 2 portals by using 5 to 6 healers inside with no need of bloodlust to be wasted, which means that a good balance between spell power and haste rating is the most optimal choice of gearing. In this instance, swap your weapon with the highest spell power one you have. The BIS is either Royal Scepter or Blood Surge. Swap your Libram of Renewal with Libram of Veracity. For trinkets, you'd want to use Talisman of Resurgence or Magia's Misguided Kill to pop it during a massive healing phase and paired with GTS trinket that provides a lot of spell power, as well as the effect also do scale with Twisted Nightmare stacks for additional healing along with ICC buff, improved Devotion Aura, Holy Paladin's healing cooldowns and Guardian Spirit. If you have no GTS, use the highest spell power trinket. Be sure to use any 264 item level pants with crit and haste you have and that are equipped with full spell power gems. Swap the old plate gear from duplicated items you have with the one gemmed with haste rating like chest, gloves, boots. If you have such items with spell power gems, then it's even better. Be sure to use Ashen Ring and pair it with Ring of Rapid Ascent or whatever second highest throughput ring you have. You should consider having a second tier 10 head equipped with Revitalized Skyfall Diamond Metagem. Otherwise, don't really bother to waste metagems for just one encounter unless you're going to pass. Same goes for Spell Power Flask. Lastly, swap your Glyph of Seal of Wisdom with Glyph of Seal of Light for additional 5% healing increase. For pre-pull setup, be sure to disable Righteous Fury in case you have it activated. Cast a random Holy Light about 10 seconds before the engage to proc both Light's Grace and Libram of Veracity. The latter may require to do 1 or 3 Holy Light casts, as the chance for the Libram to proc is not 100%. Use your Sacred Shield on the main tank or yourself and sit quickly to drink mana. In all cases, once you enter the first portal, you should cast and maintain your Sacred Shield on yourself till the end of the fight. A moment before the engage, pre-pot with either Potion of Speed or Wild Magic. This depends on the fact if you're going to gain Power Infusion on start or not, and pop your Nitro boosts to position yourself as fast as possible in the melee range of Valithria, while using your Judgments on one of the closest Rising Archmages to proc Judgments of the Pure on yourself, plus cast Beacon of Light on Valithria. From now on, your job is to spam Holy Light when you're outside of the portals. But who you should spam Holy Light on? The most optimal strategy, and what parsers and speedrunners do, is to ensure that the raid has a Beast Mastery Hunter with Spirit Bond talent and Tenacity Pet with Blood of the Rhino talent. These talents increase all healing effects on Hunter's Pet by 10% and 40% respectively. On top of that, both talents stack multiplicatively for a total of 54% more healing received for the pet. Mages should also buff Valithria and Hunter's Pet with Amplify Magic. It's important that the Hunter keeps his pet close to Valithria Dreamwalker at all times during the encounter. This whole setup is important because of Glyph of Holy Light and its double dipping mechanics. That being said, the amount healed by the Glyph will be increased by 54% because the initial heal from Holy Light will be increased by 54%, and on top of that, the Glyph will additionally double dip with Twisted Nightmare stacks, improved Devotion Aura, ICC buff and Holy Paladin's healing cooldowns when they're used. This combination of healing effects creates an insane multiplier for Glyph of Holy Light. The second option is having a Warlock with Demon Armor close to the boss, and this will increase the healing from Glyph of Holy Light by 20% instead. While this is significantly less than what Hunter's Pet offers as a healing multiplier, it's still the second best option to remember in case your Hunter doesn't have a Tenacity Pet. In regular raids, however, this whole preparation seems very overpowered and not really necessary, especially when 5 to 6 healers can do the job easily done by using 1 or 2 portals. In these scenarios, it's just better to spam Holy Light on yourself, thus making the 5% healing advantage from Divinity talent. Once the portals open, all healers assigned should quickly enter and fly around the Emerald Dream to collect Twisted Nightmare Orbs. Healers should fly perfectly stacked as a single entity because of the range box of these is very small, and you may not consume an orb if you're slightly behind the group. That being said, waiting for some healer that is left behind is the key for a good organization and discipline. Holy Paladins can communicate for Aura Mastery rotation on Crusader Aura for every portal, but it is not necessary because there is enough time to collect all orbs before the timer for Emerald Dream runs out. When you're inside the portals, you will have to heal yourself occasionally with Holy Shock and Instant Flash of Light because the Twisted Nightmare stacks inflict damage. The more stacks you have, the more damage you will receive. That being said, be sure to keep Sacred Shield on yourself for additional damage mitigation and refresh it every time you're in Emerald Dream. Once you go outside of the portals, refresh your beacon on Valithria and Judgment on the first stat you see to maintain your haste buff from the talent. Then continue with a steady stream of Holy Light casts on you, Warlock or Hunter's Pet depending on the scenario you're in. When the final push phase comes, pop every cooldown you have via macro and then use Lay on Hands if it's off cooldown and continue with Holy Light casts until the boss is fully healed. Don't forget to use a new potion again, as which one it will depend if Bloodlust is used or not. Keep in mind that Engineering Gloves share a cooldown with Talisman of Resurgence or Magia's Misguided Quill trinkets. That being said, be sure that you don't use them before the trinket. The safest way is to remove the gloves from your macro and activate them when the trinket's effect expires. Sindragosa. Holy Paladin gameplay in this encounter slightly depends on the execution method, whether it's done with 1 or 2 flight phases. The explanation will be based on the Sindragosa encounter with 30% ICC aura, however the key points which will be explained are no different from the 0% buff version of this encounter. The general idea is maintaining healing throughput with efficient Unchained Magic mechanic management, as well as utilizing healing increasing cooldowns effectively. Few seconds before the pull, before Cindy flies down, you apply your beacon and sacred shield on the main tank and proc Grace with Holy Light. Throughout the entire fight, your beacon remains on the same target. The moment she lands, time your precast so you top off the tank right on the first swing and follow up with Judgment to proc Judgments of the Pure. After that, continue healing the raid and tank via beacon. Healing priority in all phases falls onto raid members damaged by backlash caused by instability stacks from Unchained Magic, as well as the entire melee DPS group affected by Chill to the Bone debuff stacks. Most of the endgame guilds are doing Sindragosa with 2 Holy Paladins. In the 2 flight phases scenario, Holy Paladins should coordinate which one is using Divine Shield in case both of them are affected by the first Unchained Magic in the raid. This way, and depending on the RNG with Unchained Magics, the chance of continuous coverage by Holy Paladins the entire fight until phase 2 starts is significantly increased. Once you clear your Unchained, you use Gloves, GTS and Divine Illumination and continue healing the raid. Keep in mind, using Divine Shield while affected by instability stacks will cause the stacks to detonate, not harming you but the rest of the raid members around you, so mind your position if you decided to do so. When blistering hits, use your Divine Guardian in coordination with the other Holy Paladins so both blistering colds are covered in phase 1. Another appropriate time to save and use GTS is when Sindragosa pulls you in for blistering cold. You can quickly pop your GTS and spread on the entire raid with the Holy Shock cast while the raid is still in a perfect stack. This will help to stabilize the raid's health for a few seconds while running out of blistering cold. In any case, communicate about this with the rest of the healers so you don't stack too many GTS for one blistering. Once Cindy flies down after the first flight phase, the new Unchained Magic wave will hit the raid. If the same scenario occurs and both Holy Paladins get the debuff, the other Holy Paladin should clear it with Divine Shield due to the reasons previously explained. Once Sindragosa flies down for second time and phase 2 starts, use your GTS and wings and keep healing the raid as done in phase 1, but this time keep stacking your instability debuff and do not let it fall off or expire, as upon detonation you will most likely kill the entire raid. Before Cindy hits the ground and attacks the tank, make sure you refresh your Judgment, Beacon and Sacred Shield, as there won't be any free globals in phase 2. Executing Sindragosa in one flight phase scenario is suitable only to raids with high DPS potential, as it is required to kill the boss before the second Unchained Magic wave in phase 2 hits the raid or slightly right after it hits the raid, with proper management of this mechanic. This strategy requires delayed usage of Divine Shield as well as slight adjustment in usage of healing cooldowns. When the first wave of Unchained Magic applies on the raid, no Paladin should use Divine Shield but keep it for push phase. The raid should manage to keep up the tank and the raid, allowing all affected healers to stack instability in phase 1 so it does not endanger the raid with its backlash damage. If you are not affected by Unchained Magic in first wave of phase 1, feel free to use your wings as it will provide additional healing throughput on the entire raid and ensure safety. Use the flight phase to refresh your beacon and sacred shield as well as judgment few seconds before Cindy flies down. Once Sindragosa flies down and new Unchained Magic wave is applied, use Divine Shield right on application so you remove it and continue healing the raid. At this time Sindragosa is being pushed into last phase, use gloves and Divine Illumination and heal the raid with priority on the most damaged raid members, as in this phase every raid member is affected by additional debuff called Mystic Buffet, which increases damage taken with each stack. If you are affected by fresh Unchained Magic wave, keep stacking instability and heal the raid. As for additional tips for Sindragosa encounter overall, in case you use Glyph of Seal of Light for this boss, switch to Seal of Wisdom only in situations you're being stopped of chain casting Holy Lights, usually while affected by Unchained Magic, and use that time to swing the boss for mana return while keeping an eye on your Chill to the Bone stacks as well. Each time you swap seals you gain 1 stack of instability, but for most part exploding with 1 or 2 stacks max is perfectly fine in phase 1. During the fight phases, in both explained scenarios, make sure to swap again to Seal of Wisdom and utilize it on Toms and use Divine Plea, as there is no healing necessity in this phase and mana gain is practically free as the entire raid is focused on breaking the raid members out of the Toms anyways. We move to the final encounter of Icecrown Citadel, Lich King. Holy Paladin gameplay on Lich King slightly differs when it comes to raid composition differences regarding the number of tanks and the healers in the composition, as well as the fact if it's done on 30 or 0% ICC aura. In order to provide detailed explanation and valid arguments, my focus in this guide will be on the most frequent scenario in this encounter, and that is the raid composition consisted of 2 tanks and 3 or 4 healers executing Lich King on 30% ICC aura. As previously stated, Lich King is usually faced with 2 tanks. For the pre-pull preparation you want to use Righteous Fury, cast Beacon and Sacred Shield on the off tank, the tank which is taking care of the Shambling Horrors, and cast Holy Light to proc Light's Grace. The other way around is to beacon the main tank, as the tank will take the most consistent damage, but this way you can't utilize Glyph of Holy Light on the raid when you have to heal the off tank for the spike damage from Shamblings or Infests, since off tank will position away from the raid. It's pretty much your decision and estimate what would work better in the raid and depending how well geared your tanks are. Before the pull, you want to position yourself in the melee range in order to utilize Seal of Wisdom on certain gaps between Lich King's attacks, and that is usually when he is casting either Infest, Ghouls or Shambling. So you have time to do auto attacks until the next swing when he completes the cast. You will also be able to squeeze few swings when the group has to move for shadow traps. Since the pull is defined by exact timer, you're free to use Potion of Speed or Potion of Wild Magic as a pre-pot, either to speed up your Holy Light casts or to increase the amount healed from your spells, especially if your vulnerable procs on pull. On pull, you start tracking Lich King's melee swings and heal the main tank either with Holy Lights or through the beacon. If you're vulnerable procs, try to spread the shields on as many raid members as possible, since in the first seconds of the encounter there won't be any damage on the raid apart from damage on the main tank, and the first infest should be fully covered by your Disco Priest. Judgments should be used usually 1 second before Lich King casts the first infest, as it will cause a global cooldown, and once he completes the cast, your Holy Light is already queued to heal again. In phase 1, the healing priority is on the main tank and off tank through the beacon, or off tank and the raid in case you keep beacon on the main tank, as well as a coverage of the leftover infest on the affected raid members when the tank is not in the danger. When the Lich King reaches around 74 or 72% HP, you should use wings, because at this point Lich King will have enough stacks by Siphon Plague to hit pretty hard. And since the Lich King's being pushed to transition, cast your beacon on the main tank since he'll be tanking the rages on transition. In most cases, analyzing different endgame guilds Lich King fights, the moment of transitioning is also the point when Lich King casts the last infest in phase 1, so to mitigate the initial impact of Remorseless on the raid and the infest in the same time, it is highly advised to use Divine Guardian. When Lich King starts moving to the center of the throne, refresh Sacred Shield and Judgments of the Pure buff and use Divine Plea. If there are leftover ghouls from phase 1, use them to utilize Seal of Wisdom until Raging spawns. When Raging spawns, your Divine Plea should be 2 ticks away from completion. In this case, if the raid is not dangerously affected by pain and suffering stacks, you can let Plea expire or simply cancel the last few seconds of duration with Cancel or a macro. Usually at this moment, Resto Shaman and Disco Priest will use Hymn of Hope mana type combo, so you should focus on healing while returning free mana. When raging is taunted, position in the melee range and heal the raid with priority on groups affected by pain and suffering. It is optimal to use GTS mid-transition due to the fact that on each raging spawn, all melee DPS merge to the raging spawn point, increasing the exposure to pain and suffering due to stacking. If something goes wrong or stacks from pain and suffering on the raid are 4 to 5, combine your GTS with Divine Illumination for extra healing or keep Divine Illumination for second phase. Around 2 or 3 seconds into the end of transition, swap your beacon and Sacred Shield to the off tank because he will take the Lich King, since main tank will still deal with the last raging spirit, and position yourself in the middle of the fighting area where Lich King will be tanked. Healing in phase 2 is slightly different compared to phase 1 due to the simple fact that you heal the raid to clear the infest and only one tank is taking damage at a time while he is covered through a beacon. However, the major difference is defined by Soul Reaper damage, as each requires special attention from the Holy Paladin. Soul Reaper damage mitigation falls into tank defensive cooldown management part, which is not the subject of this guide, but it is covered in spreadsheet shared in my community Discord. As previously stated, healing the Soul Reaper mechanic requires additional attention. However, it is a timed ability. Your obligation as a tank heal is to precast Holy Light so it tops off the tank exactly on the impact of shadow damage part from Soul Reaper. One Holy Light is usually enough to heal up the tank to maximum HP. However, as Lich King gains melee haste with the application of Soul Reaper, you need to provide a continuous stream of Holy Light without downtime in order to prevent tank's death due to the increased frequency of Lich King's attacks. Therefore, your position needs to be on the side of Lich King, except for the moments when Valkyries are going to spawn, as you don't want to go into a different direction in case you're getting grabbed. And no movement is allowed during melee haste, as it can be critical for the tank. As additional tip, I would strongly advise to communicate with the Resto Shaman in order to synchronize the individual movement and positioning to avoid the healing downtime in case of bad defile placement from random raid members, as it often happens, which ends up zoning both of the tank healers, resulting in another critical moment for the tank. On 30% ICC aura, proper defensive cooldown management by main tank for each Soul Reaper ensures coverage for the entire phase 2, since there are no external entities damaging the tank apart from Lich King himself. However, Holy Paladin could be asked to assist via providing an external like Handsack or Divine Guardian in some critical moments and unexpected moments in the fight. The usual situation where Holy Paladin is using Divine Guardian is the overlapping moment of 5th Infest and 3rd Soul Reaper, as it ensures mitigation for both mechanics. Each Soul Reaper should be handled as previously stated without exceptions. Between 1st and 2nd Soul Reaper, there is a small downtime in spike damage and you're safe to use Divine Plea to regenerate some mana. As each second Soul Reaper is usually tanked with a major defensive cooldown by any of the tanks, no healing increasing cooldowns should be used at this stage, but just regular healing coverage of the mechanic. However, in case one or more healers are being grabbed of Valkyries, and here I refer more to Disco Priest and Resto Shaman, then a healing cooldown may come in handy for the next Infest in case no defensive cooldowns are available. In the duo tanking scenarios, the swapping moment between the tanks happens on third wave of the Valkyries, and this is the moment to swap your beacon. After the second Soul Reaper, the damage on the tank becomes significant, as he already has 2 waves of Valkyries casting Siphon on him as a pure shadow damage over time, and additional damage still piles up from Infest and incoming Soul Reaper. This is the moment to use Wings or Divine Illumination, depending on what you have available, and Gloves, as it will help with bursting through the only realistically dangerous part of the encounter in Phase 2. Having a 4th Soul Reaper in the described scenario is highly unlikely, however, it should be handled in the same way as the first one. At this period of fight in Phase 2, Lich King is already going into transition, so the healing priority on the second transition phase is literally the same as it is on the first transition. Once you position yourself in the melee range of the Raging, use GTS with some healing cooldown you have left, if it's really necessary, and pump the raid with Holy Light to top everyone. Beacons should be already on the tank which handles the Ragings due to the swap in Phase 2. Once second transition ends, Phase 3 starts. Use your Divine Plea while hitting the remaining Raging, and move from the ledge once main tank takes Lich King, and just heal them both with Holy Light until Harvest Soul is casted. In the chamber, always try to be slightly in front of the group in order to successfully cast 2 or 3 Holy Lights for each repositioning inside due to Shadow Bomb mechanic. Before you are teleported outside, use a beacon and Sacred Shield on the tank that is taking Lich King, and when you are outside, cover the off tank until the remaining Raging is dead. During Phase 3, your positioning should be behind Lich King all the time, beacon and Sacred Shield on the tank which is taking Lich King, and your healing focus on the tank who soaks the collapsing wild spirits. Use your GTS always when available and inside Frostborn Chamber to additionally help with AoE healing, since it has no value to keep it and use it for the outside. Moving on to the final boss in the expansion, Halion. For the pre-pull setup, we use the same strategy like we did for the majority of ICC bosses. You'd want to start about 10 seconds before engaging Halion by casting a random Holy Light to proc Light's Grace buff on yourself. Use Beacon and Sacred Shield on the main tank, while you still have enough seconds left to return mana lost via mana regen food before the pull. The usual raid composition for Halion consists of at least 2 Holy Paladins. Reason for this lies in the fact that on start of Phase 3, Halion is split into Physical and Twilight Realm, which requires constant tank healing on 2 tanks at the same time. Therefore, 1 Holy Paladin is assigned to heal inside and 1 for the outside tank. Considering this statement, the pre-pull setup regarding the usage of Sacred Shield is slightly different, so if you're assigned to Shadow Realm, you should apply your Sacred Shield on the off tank instead in Phase 1, so you do not override the one from the other Holy Paladin, which is assigned for Physical Realm only. Holy Paladin gameplay regarding both realms does not differ in significant matter, as it is all about keeping the tanks alive. However, some minor differences exist regarding the usage of trinkets and the healing priority, so I will cover both of the situations to make it easier to understand. If you're assigned to heal in Physical Realm in Phase 3, it is highly advised to combine 2 mana preservation trinkets, Meteorite and Soul Preserver, or Solace. Soul Preserver is by far the second best mana trinket for Holy Paladin, where Solace just takes the best from the both worlds, spell power and MP5. It is up to you what would work the best for you as a second trinket. Using GTS outside is not optimal since there is no AoE happening, therefore the value of GTS tends to 0. If you're assigned to heal in Twilight Realm, however, you should play with GTS as it provides you with additional healing cooldown since the raid takes constant raid-wide shadow damage every 2 seconds due to Dusk Shroud ability. Apply the pre-pull strategy explained before, and once the tank moves to engage the boss, pre-cast a Holy Light to top him up on the first melee swing. Keep casting Holy Light and pay close attention to Flame Breath timer. Once the timer for cast is 1 or 2 seconds away, cast your Judgment to proc Judgments of the Pure while moving closer to Halion, and follow up with Holy Light to top of the tank right on Breath damage impact. Breath will reset the melee swing timer for Halion, so you're safe to continue casting Holy Lights in the same rhythm to keep the tank topped. Once Meteor Strike mechanic occurs, while crossing to the other side of the fighting area, if the tank is using his major defensive cooldown for first Meteor, use this situation to reapply Judgment and follow up with Holy Shock on the tank until you're static again. Once Inferno and Ember spawn, your healing priority now should be focused on the off tank and main tank through the beacon. Swapping sides outside and dealing with mentioned mechanics should be done as previously explained, and you should adapt your gameplay according to the present scenario in the raid, which requires communication with the main tank. In case you're affected by combustion debuff, simply go to the barrier wall and dispel yourself. When you enter the Twilight Realm, you deal with soul consumption in the same way. Just keep in mind that using Divine Shield where affected with the debuff will instantly remove it and place the Void Zone under your feet, so care in which position you're using it, if you're using it. Once Halion reaches 75% HP, he'll phase, forcing the raid into Twilight Realm. You should use this phasing time to refresh Beacon on the main tank which tanks inside and your Sacred Shield on any melee DPS, preferably a warrior. Before the raid enters, main tank aside for Twilight Realm should enter first with a pre-used major defensive cooldown or pain suppression from Disco Priest. After that, the entire raid except main tank, off tank and Holy Paladin assigned for physical realm only should go inside the portal. Inside the Twilight Realm, the entire raid should be stacked as a single entity and move according to pre-assigned movement pattern by cutters announced usually by the main tank inside. When you enter, you should immediately use your GTS combined with Divine Illumination, and if you're lucky and the Valithria proc occurs when you enter, try to spread the shield on as many raid members as possible. As each cutter is followed by Dark Breath, the tank will have to rotate defensive cooldowns or ask for externals to mitigate the damage, and it is expected that he asks for externals. Just keep in mind that using Handsack on the main tank without Divine Shield or Deep Rot as a compromise option can bring your HP dangerously low, which sometimes results in death if the tick of Dusk Shroud hits you in the same time, so keep this in mind. When Halion reaches 50% HP, he'll phase once again, splitting his entity into both physical and Twilight Realm, and he'll be active in both realms simultaneously. This phase is all about keeping Halion's health as even as possible in the physical and the Twilight Realm to manage through stacks of corporeality. Corporeality is a buff placed on the boss that rises or falls as the boss's health in one realm gains a disparity over the boss's health in another. The higher the stacks of corporeality, the less damage the boss will take and the more damage the boss will deal. If the corporeality difference is too high, the tank which tanks Halion in the realm with less value of corporeality will receive significantly more damage, which enforces additional defensive cooldowns usage and more intense healing. This is why guilds use Bloodlust at different times for Twilight and physical realms in order to balance corporeality. However, this is important for Holy Paladins, as in third phase, the healing cooldowns usage directly relies on this mechanic and the severity of incoming tank damage. If the corporality reaches 30% for some reason, this is the moment to use wings, and if available, Divine Illumination, as the damage inflicted on the tank will be high. Divine Plea should be used only when tank is using his major defensive cooldown, Icebound Fortitude, Divine Protection or Survival Instincts. Reason for that lies in the fact that the damage inflicted upon the tank in this case is minimal, and your derived Holy Lights can keep the tank alive and you can utilize Divine Plea fully. Gloves should be used when Inferno spawns in Physical Realm or between the cutters if you're in Twilight Realm. Using Righteous Fury in this encounter is very useful, however, its usage in Physical Realm directly depends on the skill of your off-tank, as healing aggro can get you killed the moment Embers spawn, since you cannot stop healing the main tank in order to prevent the initial aggro from Embers. I strongly advise you not to use it in Phase 1 and Phase 3 if you're healing outside, but feel free to use it in the Twilight Realm, as the damage reduction from this talent comes quite in handy. In all phases, always stay in the max melee range so you can utilize your Seal of Wisdom as much as possible when the tank is not in danger, as well as while crossing in Physical Realm. Innervates are usually assigned to Restoration Shamans, so try to squeeze in a swing or two if the tank is not in life and death situation. If you're assigned to be the Holy Paladin for Physical Realm in Phase 3, you do not enter the portal at the start of Phase 2. While you're outside, waiting for Phase 3 to start, use your Divine Plea on full duration. Usually you can cast Divine Plea twice, and get ready to heal the tank once Halion splits when Phase 3 starts. The preparation is literally the same as it is in the pre-pull strategy, but make sure to coordinate with the main tank outside, as he is strictly required to use defensive cooldown once Halion is pushed to 50% HP. For the final of this video guide, let's go over a brief recap. As a Holy Paladin, you have to know which spell to use for every circumstance. Make sure to have those spells on your bars and make sure they're hotkeyed. Use your cooldowns effectively, make sure you know when to use your potions and demonic runes. Learn to play to your strengths. As a healer, you have to be both reactive and preemptive, which sounds pretty hard to do, but you have to anticipate incoming damage if it's going to happen, but also react to spiky damage or burst damage if you didn't expect it to happen. Your UI and keybinds are just as important as your gear, consumables and spells. You won't be effectively using those things if your UI add-ons or keybinds are junk, so make sure you put in the time and effort to ensure those are good. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join my community Discord channel, link is in the description below. We have some awesome people there who will help you and answer to all of your questions if you're hungry for more information. Until next time.